This is not believable.
I'm asking you questions about an ongoing investigation, questions you cannot answer. The majority insists on demanding some of the most sensitive information in the Deputy Attorney General's possession, documents he cannot provide for the same reason. They want copies, for example, of the scope documents that lay out the Special Counsel's exact lines of inquiry. Such a disclosure would be dangerous and
okay, the networks are down, the equipment is ready, and we've crippled their supplies. Mrs. Rackman has written our check and given us the green light. We're good to finally move on that submarine and stop this threat once and for all. When you're ready, get your crew together and head back to planning.
Why? Why have House Republicans been so dismissive of Russia's attacks on the United States? Why are Republicans so intent on destroying public confidence in the Justice Department and in the Special Counsel's investigation? Why have they abandoned House rules to pick totally unnecessary fights with you, Mr. Strzok, with Lisa Page, and with Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein? The obvious answer is because they are scared. Because President Trump is scared. Because the Special Counsel's investigation is operating at a breakneck pace and has already produced 5 guilty pleas and criminal charges against 23 individuals and entities. Because accountability is coming, one way or another, and they are scared and they are trying to undermine the investigation and to distract attention. Now, I must say the basis of many of these questions that we are hearing today of Mr. Strzok by the majority, by the Republicans, is the 11-hour interview with Mr. Strzok. And I now call upon the majority to release that transcript in full today. This will show that this is the entire joint investigation is at best a partisan distraction from more important matters. But the witness before us today, Mr. Strzok, testified not under confidentiality, but not under confidentiality rules, but in private for 11 hours. There is nothing that prevents the majority from releasing that transcript. Selected portions of that transcript have been leaked by members of the majority, misleading portions taken out of context. And I don't know if demand is the right word, but I demand insofar as I can.
You calling for some wheels? I'm Johnny on the spot.
So people
I'll
can
hook
see
you up.
Can see the testimony
on the way.
Today, and can make better judgments. And I ask the chairman now to order the release of that transcript.
We don't have time for
Will the chairman do so?
Not today.
Will the chairman ever do so?
You can direct your questions to the witness. That's your time to do that, not to discuss this.
I will observe that the chairman will not answer the question, and that this is part of the continuing evasion and attempt at obfuscation, because
Will the
we
gentleman
know...
yield?
No, not at the moment. I will in a
Very
moment
good.
when I finish the sentence. The pattern. And the pattern is we're not releasing transcripts except parts of them that may convey the impression, false or true, that we want to convey. There is no legal reason why this transcript should not be released. There is only a partisan reason why this transcript should not be released. There is no valid reason why it should not be released. If there was a purpose to our inquiries, to our spending 11 hours, there's no reason they shouldn't be released. I'll yield now.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I would just say that it is very customary in investigations to keep transcripts of private interviews until the conclusion of the investigation. This investigation certainly hasn't concluded, and it is very appropriate that the questions that were asked and the answers given are not shared with other potential witnesses.
Reclaiming my time, I will observe that many of the same questions are being asked today, number one. But number two, given the fact that selective portions of the transcript have been leaked, I think that changes it. I'll yield to Mr. Cicilline.
Well, I was just going to inquire. I've sort of been trying to get the answer to this question, but to the extent that this transcript is available to all of us, I intend to release it. I can't find any prohibition that makes us unable to release it in our rules. We now have the same witness after 11 hours here in a public hearing, so the notion that we have to somehow keep this secret while pieces that are being released is doing a real disservice to the American people. And I'm asking the ranking member, is there any reason this afternoon I can't just release it as a member of this committee?
Would the ranking member yield?
One second. I'm not aware of any, but I have to look at the House rules and all. I will yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. It is correct that both members on the Republican side and the Democratic side have used quotations from the transcript for the purpose of interviewing a hearing, and that is a legitimate use of the transcript.
And I'm reclaiming my time. Some members have also used it for the purpose of talking to the news media, and that may be or may not be an appropriate use. But be that as it may, the transcript should be released. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yield.
Yes, I'll yield to the gentleman from Maryland.
I'd like to ask the ranking member if it's legitimate within the rules of the committee and the House of Representatives for members to release certain portions of the overall transcript. Is there anything that would prevent us from releasing the entire transcript?
I'm unaware of anything that would, off the top of my head, that would prevent a member from releasing the transcript. But that's off the top of my head. I wouldn't want to say that definitively.
Mr. Chairman, are you aware of anything that would preclude us from doing that?
Yeah, the decision is made by the chairman of the committee.
Before I yield back, let me just say, we don't want portions released.
I'm not in the practice of having the chairman of the committee make decisions for me. So could you explain to me, is there a rule that precludes me from this afternoon releasing this transcript? If it's just your preference, that's not sufficient.
This is a conduct of an investigation. The chair of the two committees are conducting that investigation. We will decide when transcripts of private interviews are going to be released. And no one on this side of the aisle has released it other than to ask a question based upon it in a hearing, which is an appropriate use of it.
Reclaiming my time.
We could release it as part of this hearing.
Reclaiming my time, I will observe that some members have released parts of the transcript by being quoted in the media, not for questions here. Does the gentleman from Rhode Island still want time?
I just have a unanimous consent request. I'd ask unanimous consent that the transcript of this witness be made an official part of this record in its entirety.
I object. Objection is heard.
The gentleman from
roll call vote.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Again, Mr. Chairman, I think this is of tremendous interest to the American people. There's an effort here to sort of characterize this witness's behavior. Much ado has been made of it. We had an 11-hour hearing in which this very same witness has testified. He's now testifying consistently before the American people. There seems to me no good reason, other than a personal preference of some apparently, that this transcript not be released. And I would say to the chairman respectfully, if there is no prohibition, the fact that you would prefer we not is insufficient to persuade me and I think Mr. Raskin, and we intend to release this transcript unless someone presents us with some rule under our House proceedings or this committee that prevents us from doing it. And we'll give you till 5 o'clock this afternoon to present that. Otherwise, we intend to release the transcript.
Reclaiming my time. I'll simply, I want to associate myself with the remarks of the gentleman from Rhode Island. I would agree with him. I think it would be a public service to release these transcripts. That's why I demanded they be released. There's no good reason not to. And at this point, I think I'll yield back the balance of my time.
If so, the chair wants to respond to the gentleman from Rhode Island. First of all,
yield back the balance of my time.
First of all, there was an agreement in the interview that it was private, confidential, and that it would not be released. So that is not going to take place under this set of circumstances. Secondly, if the gentleman, we're here investigating irregularities conducted in investigations by the FBI. If the gentleman wants to perpetuate that by creating irregularities here and releasing questions so that other potential future witnesses can read the question before they're asked, that is, in my opinion, exactly what many on the gentleman's side of the aisle have been all about, attempting to disrupt this investigation and this hearing process from start to finish.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Strzok.
Would the gentleman yield?
Reclaiming my time.
Mr. Chairman, I object.
Mr. Strzok, would you object to the release of the transcript of that hearing?
No, I would not object.
Thank you. I will observe then that the minority, the chairman says that there was an agreement, not on the conduct of that hearing. The minority was not party to that agreement. There may have been an agreement between Mr. Gowdy and Mr. Goodlatte, but at no point were we asked
Stated on the record in the hearing.
No, it was stated as a decision, as a fact, as a fait accompli. We were not asked. We agreed to nothing because we were not asked. And we think that the transcript ought to be released for the reasons stated. And if the witness doesn't object, I don't know why the majority should object. And I yield to Mr. Meadows.
If the gentleman will yield, in earnest, I will be glad to work with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about releasing all relevant information. I mean, I think if we're talking about full transparency, let's talk about full transparency in a variety of other things. You know, it's interesting we want to release one thing, but yet we're somehow allowing Peter Strzok to suggest that there's a whole lot of things that are off the record. And, but I will work in earnest with my colleagues.
I appreciate the gentleman, and let me simply say that we are not disrupting a legitimate investigation into the investigation. The Republican investigation is intended to and is trying to disrupt the investigation into the Russian interference in our election by the special counsel.
Would the gentleman yield?
That's really at stake. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. All right. So now that the chairman and the ranking member have had ample time to ask questions, and I think that the gentleman from New York has the record, we are going to move, because we have 72 more members who have questions to ask, to strict adherence to the 5-minute rule, and we'll begin by recognizing the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me observe that you know, there have been all kinds of complaints about leaking transcripts and things like that. One of the reasons we are here today is because there has been a flood of leaks out of the Justice Department about what is going on. It's barely a day goes by when you can't pick up the newspaper and find out that it's rumored this and rumored that. And then we have a witness from the FBI that comes up here and says, oh no, we can't talk about that here to the Congress, which has constitutional oversight responsibility, because it's against our rules. Well, I hope there'd be a few prosecutions of people out of justice that have been leaking this stuff to the various news media. Now, I want to get to looking at statutes. You know, you look at rules, I've been looking at statutes. And somehow along the line, in the report on the conclusions of the Clinton investigation, the word gross negligence was changed to extremely careless in determining Mrs. Clinton's handling of classified information. Now, gross negligence would mean
quite a digital footprint you're making. You don't mind my saying so.
Extremely
little foolish.
Careless.
Anyway, there's only one thing an operator like you needs right now, and that's doomsday protection. Really, there's a lot more to the underground bunker we just put up on Mays Bank foreclosures, including business opportunities, but that's part of it. Log on, take a look, and buy it. You won't regret it.
Characterized Mrs. Clinton's actions as grossly negligent. Is that correct?
That's my recollection. It's me.
Yes.
I know you don't care about optics, but maybe taking some garage space in the building might be the message we need to send. Plus, it's actually really cool.
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you recall at the June 6, 2016 meeting attended by you and Mr. Ribicki, Ms. Moyer, Mr. Maffa, and Lisa Page to discuss the language of the statute on whether to use grossly negligent or something else in the draft statement? What was discussed at that meeting?
So, sir, I don't remember that specific meeting. There are a variety of meetings with a bunch of people that included discussion of this concern.
Okay. Did the alternative phrase extremely careless come up at the meeting?
It did at some point, sir. I don't know if it was during that meeting or at another one. I don't remember that.
Whenever it happened, who brought it up?
My recollection, sir, is that somebody within our Office of General Counsel did. It was one of the attorneys. I don't remember which one.
You don't remember who did?
No, it was a legal issue that one of the attorneys brought up.
Okay. Now, immediately after that meeting, metadata shows that you modified the draft statement on June 6th. Is this when the phrase grossly negligent was changed to extremely careless?
Sir, again, I don't recall specifically when it happened. I am aware as well of that metadata. My recollection is of working on the draft with a group of us in my office, because it was the largest office, and taking the inputs of probably five different people.
Was it your computer that put the change into the statement?
Based on my subsequent review of that metadata, I believe that to be true.
Okay, and who has access to your computer? Anybody beside you?
No, I do. My secretary had access to elements of it, but...
And why was the change made? You know, you were in the meeting where it was agreed that the change would be made. Why was that?
My recollection, sir, again, was, and I'm not an attorney, my recollection was that attorneys within the FBI had raised the concern that the use of gross negligence triggered a very specific legal meaning. In a legal context...
Yeah, criminal.
In the legal...
Criminal.
That's exactly right. In a legal context, grossly negligent is used in various statutes to, particularly one of the mishandling statutes in 793, to talk about a criminal element of the criminal offense.
Okay.
And so, sir, if I may quickly, and I promise I'll...
Well, so, let me say, this change was Hillary's get-out-of-jail-free card, right?
Absolutely not, sir.
Well,
not in any way.
Hillary hasn't been prosecuted, so if she wasn't grossly negligent but was extremely careless, then there's no criminal standard involved. With grossly negligent, there is.
Sir, I think there are a lot of things I would disagree with in that assertion. First is, she received no get-out-of-jail-free card. We pursued the facts.
She did get a get-out-of-the-White House free card when the voters cast their votes.
Sir, I've heard that said a lot, and I can tell you there's nothing further from the truth.
Oh.
There was an effort
Trump won. That's the truth.
So, sir, what I would tell you with regard to that decision, there was concern within the perspective of a legal definition of that term that people would draw an inference based on that use that it was necessarily talking about a particular subset of a statute. My understanding is...
My time is just about up. That rates 4 Pinocchios. I yield back.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Gentleman may respond.
Sir, what I would tell you with regard to that decision is that there was concern about the use of the word grossly negligent, and the question of whether or not Director Comey wanted to convey that in the sense of applying the elements of a crime, and that whether or not his use, when people heard that, particularly when lawyers looked at it, whether or not they would interpret that as his saying that she did or did not commit any particular statute. My recollection is that the lawyers, based on that, looking at the use of the word grossly negligent, looking at the way that's been defined, looking at the statute where it occurs, both realized that that was probably not what he wanted to say, and ultimately he made the decision to change that wording and convey what it was he did want to say, and that all of those discussions were generated based on a legal discussion of the use of that term as a legal definition, not as a indicia of violation of any particular statute at all.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Strzok. I think it would be easier, going back to the last question, if you were simply able to indicate, to your knowledge, whether the evidence would have supported the use of gross negligence, and apparently the decision made by the lawyers in the FBI was that that was not the case, and therefore that term should not be used. I just want to talk at a more macro level about what's going on here. You know, one of the things I try and do is to imagine how I would feel if various things had been done or said about a member of my own party who was president, and how I would react, because I think it's important to try and understand that. And when you take a look at the text that you sent, I think you've acknowledged that it would make people who were supporters of Trump uneasy about your intentions. And I think that was reflected in the Inspector General's report. And I think obviously that brought suspicion of you and the FBI among people who were Trump supporters. The fact that you also had highly critical texts of the Attorney General Eric Holder, of Governor Martin O'Malley, of Senator Bernie Sanders, I mean, isn't really relevant. They were not, to the best of my knowledge, subject to an investigation. And so, you know, it was important that the Inspector General go in and take a look to find out for us, for this committee, and for the American people what really happened. And he did. He went in, he spent a lot of time, he interviewed many people, and here was his conclusion. He did chastise you, and I understand you accept that admonishment, but found that there was no evidence whatsoever of political bias in the decisions made in that investigation. And a direct quote, we did not find documentary or testimonial evidence that improper considerations were made. Now, you know, to listen to some of my friends, you'd think that the FBI, which I had always felt was a rather made up of conservative law enforcement people, had magically been transformed into a left-wing organization. That's not my understanding. And in fact, if you take a look at the people who are in charge, I mean, you've got Mr. Wray, who was appointed by President Trump, who is not a Democrat, Mr. Comey, who was appointed by Mr. Trump, he's not a Democrat. I happen to know that Robert Mueller's not a Democrat. So these are not political decisions made by political operatives. They should be following the evidence. And I'd just like to note that if you had wanted to harm and interfere with the election of President Trump, you could have leaked information that the investigation was ongoing. But none of that came out. And as a matter of fact, we asked the leaders of the Department of Justice and FBI about whether there was an investigation of Mr. Trump prior to the election, and we were told they could not comment on it, which was in fact the appropriate response. You should not comment on an ongoing investigation. If you find something, you have an indictment. If you don't find something, you say nothing. That's where Mr. Comey erred. He violated that policy and he damaged the campaign of one of the candidates, and the rest is history. So I just think that this hearing, this extraordinary hearing, I've been here a member of Congress for 24 years. It's the first time we've had this kind of event, a circus really, of trying to really investigate the investigators when that's already done. I would urge that we make sure that the actions we take do not create further divisions in our country. You know, President Trump tweeted a few months ago, quote, "The top leadership and investigators of the FBI and the Justice Department have politicized the sacred investigative process in favor of Democrats and against Republicans, something which would have been unthinkable just a short time ago." Is that tweet supported by the Inspector General's report,
No.
Mr. Strzok? No, it is not. I would hope that those of us on the committee who believe in the rule of law, who understand that our country will be damaged if we allow political divisions to attack our law enforcement agencies, to undercut investigations, that we will be harming our country in a way that our enemies, including Russia, hope we would do. That's why they interfered in our election, to cause us harm, to create division among the American people and among us here in the halls of government. So I would ask that we take yes for an answer. The Inspector General did investigate this matter. He found out there wasn't political influence, and we wait for the results of Mr. Mueller's investigation. I pray that we find that our president was not involved. That would be great news for our country, and if that's Mr. Mueller's finding, I will accept it, not investigate it. I hope that we can put our partisanship at the door, step back from the precipice that we are finding ourselves now, and I would hope that this hearing, which I think serves no good purpose for our country, could be brought to an end. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Madam Gentlewoman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, very quickly, I would like to associate myself with the really outstanding opening statements made by Chairman Goodlatte and Chairman Gowdy, which I think were two of the finest opening statements I've heard in my 30 years in Congress, and express my views completely. Let me also say, while Mr. Strzok will stubbornly not admit what almost everyone else knows is extreme bias. I find it amazing that he can sit here and say that he was not biased in a way that clearly colored and affected his investigations. And if you don't agree with that, I want to read the words from Mr. Horowitz, the Inspector General of the Justice Department, who wrote that the Clinton investigation, quote, was, the way it was conducted, quote, was inconsistent with typical investigative strategy and gave rise to accusations of bias and preferential treatment, unquote. Then I would guess that Mr. Strzok knows Chris Swecker, who spent 24 years with the FBI and retired as the head of all the FBI criminal investigations. And Mr. Swecker wrote, he said, the IG report presents jarring evidence of political bias by the FBI against Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, but fails to add it all up to come to the inevitable conclusion that political bias was there. This is like saying 1 + 1 = 0. Mr. Strzok, do you have any reason to think that Mr. Horowitz or Mr. Swecker have some sort of bias or animosity toward you?
So I disagree with Mr. Swecker's conclusions. I can't speak to Mr. Swecker's motivations of bias whatsoever, and I know of no bias by the Inspector General.
Also, Cheryl Atkinson, a columnist for one of the Capitol Hill newspapers, wrote this, quote, the earth-shattering finding on Strzok by the Inspector General confirms a citizenry's worst fears. A high-ranking government intel official allegedly conspired to affect the outcome of a U.S. presidential election. Let me ask you this, Mr. Strzok. You know that judges who have even minimal bias are required to recuse themselves from a case. Do you think that FBI agents have some sort of that they're special people who shouldn't be held the same high standards that judges are in deciding whether to recuse themselves?
PSN. Sir, I would absolutely say that FBI agents, judges, all are expected that whatever their personal beliefs, that they set those beliefs aside in their pursuit of the truth or their application of the law.
So you don't believe that you were entitled to a lower standard
I believe I believe I'm held to the highest standard and that I abided by that.
But you told Chairman Goodlatte that you did not think you should have recused yourself in this case.
Sir, I'd say that's entirely consistent. I believe that all of my personal opinions were never taken into account in anything that I did in an official act. I think that was appropriate. I think that is in keeping with the highest standards of the FBI.
Well, I think that since both the Clinton and Trump investigations had and have such tremendous political ramifications, I think the ethical, fair, just, and proper thing would have been for you to recuse yourself and move on to other work. There were many other cases that you could have worked on that you had never expressed any bias, were there not? There were all kinds of cases.
Sir, I completely disagree with you. I don't think it would have been either necessary or required for me to recuse. I think every day with the Clinton investigation, with the Russian influence investigation, with the thousands of other investigations, that when I walked in the door, the entirety of my action was dedicated to pursuing the facts, wherever they lie.
You know that many times judges have defendants appear before them who, after they've been found guilty, they apologize, say they're sorry, but trying to get probation. And yet many times people think those apologies are said more in hopes of getting probation and in regret that they have been caught rather than in sincere apology. Do you feel that you should apologize in any way to the American people for the things that you have expressed, this extreme bias that you expressed? Do you have any regret as to calling Trump supporters saying that they smelled and things of that nature?
Sir, I think I expressed a couple of things. One, I don't agree with your characterization of my views as bias. I think what I clearly articulated, and I can understand those concerns, and I hope when you heard me in my opening statement, when I talked about my regret to the people, the harm and the hurt to the people that I love and my family, when I talked to the way that these texts have been used against the FBI, when I responded to questions about using a turn of phrase about, smelling when I should have said hearing or seeing or whatever the case may be, that yes, those were not intended as direct animus towards any set of people. And I hope people understand that I do sincerely regret that. So I've said
time of the gentleman has expired.
And I hope you hear that.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Strzok. For months, the Republicans have increasingly used their congressional oversight authority to undermine Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. They have even called for his investigation to be shut down. And why? It's concerning national security, and it seems to be successful. The special counsel has now obtained 5 guilty pleas and indicted 18 others. And included in these indictments and confessions and guilty pleas, Michael Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI. Rick Gates pled guilty to conspiring against our country. George Papadopoulos pled guilty to making false statements to our country and the FBI. So I'm not exactly sure what the Republicans want to shut down. Do they want to shut down the special counsel's upcoming trials against campaign manager Paul Manafort? One of these trials is scheduled to begin here in Virginia, in the Eastern District of Virginia, later this summer. And related to it, on February 22nd, a grand jury in Virginia approved a set of 32 counts of tax, financial, and bank fraud charges against Mr. Manafort. And on February 16th, a federal grand jury in the District of Columbia separately approved 5 other charges against Mr. Manafort and Mr. Gates, including, and I quote, conspiracy against the United States, end quote. And in this indictment that is coming forward, I'd like to quote from it. It says that the defendant, Paul Manafort, together with others, including Gates, knowingly and intentionally conspired to defraud the United States by impeding, impairing, obstruction, and defeating the lawful governmental functions of government agencies, namely the Department of Justice and the Department of the Treasury, and to commit offenses against the United States of America, end quote. Now, since this indictment, Gates has pleaded guilty, and he's now cooperating. And included in his statement of offense, quote, Manafort engaged in a variety of criminal schemes. And Gates is part of that work for Manafort, knowingly and intentionally conspired to assist Manafort in criminal schemes, end quote. So I'd like to ask you, Mr. Strzok, to be clear. Mr. Gates is swearing under oath that he's in his guilty plea that he conspired with Mr. Manafort in criminal activity. Is that correct, from what I'm reading?
Ma'am, I'm not familiar with this statement of facts, but I'll stipulate to what you're reading.
Okay. So in a few weeks, Mr. Manafort's trial date is set to begin, and the special counsel team of prosecutors will present their evidence. And I cannot imagine how anyone in this body or in this country, with the exception of Mr. Manafort and his co-conspirators, would ever want in any way, shape, or form to halt this trial from going forward. Can you think of any reason why anyone would want to halt this trial from going forward, Mr. Strzok?
I'm not aware of any.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Will the gentlewoman yield?
And I yield to Mr. Cummings.
But the gentleman, I yield to the gentleman, Mr. Meadows.
I thank the gentleman, and I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Chairman, in a spirit of transparency, and I think we all want transparency here, I would offer for the chairman's consideration, this body's consideration, releasing the full transcripts that we had in the 11th hour breaking with two different conditions. One is that we have the opportunity to interview Miss Lisa Page first, since those text messages were back and forth between two witnesses. And the second, that we can scrub that transcribed interview for any personal relevant information that might be embarrassing before we do that. And with that, I'll yield back.
If the gentlewoman will yield.
Yes, I yield to the gentleman.
Thank you. The gentleman's, the spirit of the gentleman's recommendation is taken, as well taken, and we will definitely take that under advisement.
The gentleman yield.
I yield.
I would also hope that we would have give the FBI the opportunity for redaction of anything that would impact on the nation's national security. I think that is extremely important, and I hope the gentleman would accept my modification.
Reclaiming my time, it's my understanding the gentleman does accept that for the gentleman from North Carolina. And I want to thank him for trying to, as he usually does, trying to work these things out and full transparency. And I think that's important. I think the American people and this committee would appreciate it.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
I yield.
Does the gentleman from North Carolina's suggestion relate solely to the testimony of Agent Strzok, or under the same guise of transparency, would we apply that same process and that same standard to the previously unreleased testimony of Andrew McCabe, who was examined in a similar environment?
I yield to the gentleman.
I think in a spirit of transparency, we need to look at all transcribed interviews to let the American people judge for themselves. I thank the gentleman for his question, and I think that's consistent with my conversation with the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield my time to my friend and colleague from Texas, Mr. Ratcliffe.
I thank my colleague for yielding. Agent Strzok, on May the 9th, 2017, President Trump fired FBI Director Jim Comey. That same day, you and FBI lawyer Lisa Page exchanged quite a few texts on the topic. At 8:14 p.m. on that day, you texted Ms. Page and said, quote, "And we need to open the case we've been waiting on now while Andy is acting," end quote. First, is that Andy McCabe, the former Deputy Director of the FBI, who has since been fired and criminally referred by the Inspector General?
It is.
All right. And what case are you referring to opening now that Andy is the acting director of the FBI?
Sir, to get into that would relate to ongoing investigations, which, consistent with the department's policy on ongoing investigations and based on the special counsel equities, I'm not authorized to discuss ongoing investigations.
Okay, well, let me see if I can give you a question that you can answer. You sent 4 more texts to Ms. Page, and her first response to you at the bottom of that page you're looking at is, quote, "We need to lock in," and then there's a black mark where someone's name's been redacted. "We need to lock in redacted in a formal, chargeable way, period. Soon, period." Whose name's been blacked out?
Sir, I don't know. I need to see the original list or original text.
You don't know? Okay. Well, I don't know either. Here's what else I don't know. I don't know if the person whose name has been redacted is Republican or Democrat. I don't know if they're black or brown or white.
I don't either, sir.
I don't know their religious beliefs. I don't know their sexual orientation. I don't know those things, and I don't care. But here's what I do know. I do know that decisions about when and whether to open investigations and when and whether to charge people with crimes aren't supposed to depend on who's sitting in the director's chair or on political decisions or on the political agendas of FBI agents and lawyers. So if a Trump-hating FBI agent and a Trump-hating FBI lawyer who have talked about effing Trump, stopping Trump, impeaching Trump, are within hours of President Trump firing their boss, if they start talking about opening an investigation now that Andy is acting and that some person needs to be locked in a formal, chargeable way soon, I know, as a former U.S. attorney, that if in fact that's what happened, I know that whoever is the subject of that case that was opened now that Andy is acting, and whoever you and Ms. Page talked about needing to be locked in soon in a formal, chargeable way, well, they would have had their civil liberties violated. They would have been deprived of due process. So my first question to you, you wouldn't answer. My second question to you, you couldn't answer. Let's go for a third question. On page 400 of the Inspector General report, someone tells the Inspector General, quote, "There is a bright line, a bright and inviolable line between what you think personally and belief and the conduct of your official business. Who said that?
I believe I did, sir.
You did say that. And I heard you say similar things last week. I heard you say similar things today. You said it very clearly. You said it very unequivocally in your opening remarks that you never crossed that inviolable line in 26 years. Earlier today, in response to a question, you said, I took my personal belief out of every official action. So, you're asking us to believe that when you say things like F Trump and stop Trump and impeach Trump, that those are just personal beliefs, and that when you say those things, you never crossed that line, that bright, inviolable line, and allow it to impact your official conduct. That's really what this comes down to, that you're asking us to believe, isn't it?
Sir, I'm asking you to believe, and I'm offering you evidence.
Yeah, well, you
whether
have.
It's the IG report, whether it's anything that's been found, that there's been no active bias found anywhere.
You have, under oath, been as clear as a bell on that. You've said it over and over again, and because of that, I'm almost embarrassed to ask you this question. Of the approximately 50,000 text messages that I've seen with your personal beliefs like F Trump, stop Trump, impeach Trump, go ahead and confirm on the record that none of that occurred on an official FBI device or on official FBI time. Go ahead and do that.
Sir, no, they did. Many of them did.
Oh, they did. Okay, so
50,000, sir.
So really, no, I'll give you a chance at the end. So what you really meant to say was that when you said you never crossed that bright, inviolable line, what you meant to say was, except for 50,000 times, except for hundreds of times a day where I went back and forth expressing my personal opinions about effing Trump and stopping Trump and impeaching Trump on official FBI phones on official FBI time. Other than that, you never crossed that line. I'm sure there are 13,000 FBI agents out there that are beaming with pride at how clearly you've drawn that line. Agent Strzok, are you starting to understand why some folks out there don't believe a word you say, and why it's especially troubling that you, of all people, are at the center of the 3 highest profile investigations in recent times that involve President Trump, and that you were in charge of an investigation investigating, gathering evidence against Donald Trump, a subject that you hated, that you wanted to F him, to stop him, to impeach him? And do you see why that might call into question everything you've touched on all of those investigations? Chairman, I'm done with this witness, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, if I can respond.
Briefly.
Sir, well, there are several questions, and I'll answer them all briefly.
There were several statements. I only heard one question.
Fair enough. First, I understand why people might think that, particularly based on the misrepresentations of extreme folks in the media, conspiracy theorists, folks in this body and elsewhere. And that's why I'm glad to be here today publicly, why I'm glad to hear that people are calling for the release of my private interview, so that people can judge for themselves who I am, what I said, and the facts, and not something that's being spun or misrepresented in some 10 o'clock talk show or other place. So absolutely, I can understand that, and I'm glad that the facts are coming out. Second, sir, to your earlier point about, I never, and I am unaware of any case being open that represented some violation of civil liberties or a removal of due process rights. I have never done any activity, opened any case with regard to that. And when you look in the context of what had occurred, sir, during the time that Director Comey had been fired, where the president said initially that that had occurred because of a memorandum written by the Deputy Attorney General looking at his conduct in the Clinton investigation, and then days afterwards pivoting and telling Russian diplomats and Lester Holt that it was because of the Russia investigation and a huge burden had been taken off his shoulders. We all were very concerned about, from an investigative standpoint, the pace and severity and the unprecedented nature of facts and events that were unfolding, and our investigative desire.
I did say briefly.
To go, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I'm wrapping up.
In that regard, though,
desire to lock things in before things change was very important to us.
Pointed to your response, however, and in the interests of full transparency, and to Mr. Ratcliffe's point, will you authorize the release of all of the other text messages that have not been released to the Congress to this point?
Sir, I would authorize the release of any work-related text messages that are out there.
But the question is, what's work-related and what is not?
That's right, sir. And I would not accept or agree to the release of non-work-related text messages.
Even though your testimony is that you would never let your work interfere with your personal opinion.
That is exactly my testimony.
So how are we going to know that unless we see those text messages?
So the Inspector General, very carefully, an independent body, went exhaustively through the entirety of that body and found, sir, that there were no acts of bias, that there was nothing demonstrable.
Inspector General works for an entirely different entity than the United States Congress. Will you authorize release of them to the United States Congress?
No, sir.
Mr. Chairman, point of inquiry. I'm trying to understand his answer. My understanding was that the Inspector General did not see what he is claiming to be his personal text, that they were requested and he delivered what he said was business related. So if I understand correctly, no one has seen anything that he determined, Mr. Strzok determined, would not be delivered because in his opinion they were not business related. I have a number of texts in front of me that I would say were very personal that we're looking at that undoubtedly he would have objected to turning over.
The gentleman makes a very good point. He may want to ask questions about that when he is shortly to be recognized. But first we're going to recognize the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'm sorry my colleague walked out before Mr. Strzok could give his answers. I hate no one. I do not hate the administration, the president, my colleagues. In fact, I love this nation. I honor this nation. And so I believe it is important that we stand on the force of truth in the Constitution. In the oversight of these two committees, it is unfortunate that none of these committees, judiciary oversight, have decided to pursue more precious or more important issues than asking about Hillary Clinton's emails, which have been well documented, that there was no criminal impact, and in essence, she was vindicated by the Inspector General's report and other reports. Unfortunately, this has become a fishing expedition. What we have not done is investigated the children being stolen away from their families, nor have we looked at our president meeting with Mr. Putin, getting his annual performance review while offending our NATO allies. Foreign policy scholars are aghast that this president, one who famously refused to read his briefing materials, will be meeting with Mr. Putin. In addition, we're wasting time doing the Clinton investigation rather than investigating the role that Russia played in the 2016 elections. Unanimous and unassailable assessment of the intelligence community is that the Russians helped Trump over Hillary and intended to harm her. In the judgment of the Republican-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee, they agree with that assessment. Unfortunately, the President and House Republicans do not agree. The leader of Russia is known to have sanctioned murder of dissidents, jailed journalists, and this is the president who is described as easy to meet with. Neither the Judiciary Committee or the Oversight Committee has investigated the president's indicating that he can pardon himself. So here we are, Mr. Strzok, to ask you questions. I saw you in the closed session. I think you're a credible witness, and I believe you love America. My questions only require yes or no. Did anything you did or say in 2016 change the fact that Trump campaign associate Carter Page was under counterintelligence surveillance going back to 2013? Anything that you did, yes or no, sir?
No.
Did anything you did or say in 2016 change the fact that in March 2016, the president met with George Papadopoulos, who would later plead guilty for lying to the FBI?
No.
Did anything you did or say in 2016 change the fact that Donald Trump Jr. met with agents of the Russian government in Trump Tower in 2016?
No.
Did anything you did or say in 2016 change the fact that the president asked Russians to hack into Hillary Clinton's emails?
No.
Did anything you did or say in 2016 change the fact that Paul Manafort, who has pleaded guilty, in fact, that in July 2016 that Paul Manafort changed the GOP party platform at the 2016 GOP convention in order to benefit Russia, or change the platform?
Ma'am, without saying whether or not that's accurate, no.
Did anything you did or say in 2016 change the fact that in May 2016, George Papadopoulos was drunk in a London bar bragging about how Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton?
Again, ma'am, without confirming whether or not that's accurate, no.
Did anything you do or say in 2016 change the fact that when Donald Trump was presented with dirt on Hillary Clinton, he responded, "I love it"?
Again, ma'am, only commenting on public accounts of that, no.
Did anything in the IG report change the fact that Donald Trump Jr. was communicating with WikiLeaks' Julian Assange about the timing of releasing emails designed to harm Hillary Clinton? Anything you do?
Anything I did, no.
You're well aware that Mr. Flynn has pleaded guilty. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
You're well aware that he was a national security advisor for the President of the United States?
That's correct.
Well, in his offense statement that we have right here, Mr. Flynn indicated that his his statements, false statements and omissions, caused impeding the Russian investigation. But more importantly, I believe it's important to take note of the fact that he provided information to the Russian ambassador that said, here, calm down. Don't bother to get upset about sanctions. And according to a whistleblower, he said the sanctions would be, quote, ripped up to allow money to start flowing to one of Flynn's business projects. You had no interference with that, did you not?
I did not.
And you had no involvement, if you will. During your June 2018 interview, I noticed some concern in your voice when recalling the 2016 campaign season, specifically October 2016, and specifically as it relates to the state of Trump-Russia investigation. Why were you so concerned about what was happening at that time?
I'm sorry, ma'am, would you rephrase that question?
During your June 2018 interview, I noticed some concern in your voice when recalling the 2016 campaign season, specifically October 2016, and specifically as it relates to the state of the Trump-Russia investigation. Why were you so concerned about what was happening at that time?
Well, I think trying to keep this at a level, not talking about open investigations.
Only
yes, ma'am. So the predicating information, the information we had, which was alleging a Russian offer of assistance to a member of the Trump campaign, was of extraordinary significance. It was credible. It was from an extraordinarily sensitive and credible source. And as we looked at what that represented, the key time was obviously coming into the election. And so for us, there was absolutely a need to, one, this was a serious allegation, two, of extraordinary gravity, and three, given the fact that the election was upon us and that if, in fact, then candidate Trump were elected, that whether he or certainly more likely or possibly members of his campaign were actively working with the Russians, we needed to get to the bottom of that. It could be that none of them were. It could be that some, or it could be on a far worse scale, but the urgency for us to understand what was going on in advance of the election and certainly in advance of any inauguration, I can't overstate the importance of that.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I put into the record, I ask unanimous consent to put into the record articles, including the one by Chris Saliza, no evidence struck bias the investigation in any meaningful way.
Without objection.
I thank you, and the patriotism of this witness and all of us should indicate that certainly Russian
the time of the gentlewoman has expired.
I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman just answered questions regarding the substance of the Trump-Russia collusion investigation. We have many more questions that we are entitled to ask, and the gentleman is responsible for answering with regard to the onset of that investigation. We are not interested in the substance of Mr. Mueller's investigation, but the manner in which it was created and your involvement in that is very much directly related to that. So when we return, we will have more questions for you regarding that, as we indicated earlier. Now the committee will stand in recess for votes, and we will reconvene at 2 p.m.
I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington. We've been following the fireworks up on Capitol Hill here in Washington, where we're hearing publicly now for the very first time from the FBI agent, former FBI agent, I should say, right at the center of President Trump and Republicans' ire. We're talking about Peter Strzok. Strzok was fired from the Russia investigation by the special counsel Robert Mueller after he was caught sending anti-Trump texts to an FBI lawyer. He was having an affair with Lisa Page. Republicans believe the text proved Strzok was biased against Trump while investigating possible collusion. But Strzok, he has been defiant. He has been defensive throughout all of this. I want to get immediate reaction from all of this. And Gloria Borger, you're among our experts. You've been listening to every word that was said over these past, about 3 hours or so. It got really, really tense.
Well, it was really tense and very partisan. And you had in Mr. Strzok a very defiant person who said, look, just because I sent these texts saying we'll stop Trump doesn't mean that I conducted any investigation any differently than I would have otherwise. I mean, the charge from the Republicans is that they believe that it is clear that he was in a rush to clear Clinton and then go after Donald Trump. And his response to that is, you know, these were personal texts. In no way would it affect my investigation, and the notion that there might be Russians colluding with people in the Trump campaign is something that he felt was a matter of great urgency. And so you had these, you know, this back and forth over what questions he could answer, whether the FBI had told him he could answer questions about the investigation. He said no, but, you know, in every way, in every interrogation from Republicans, there was the charge that you were unfair. This whole investigation, to use Donald Trump's words, could have been a witch hunt because it was started out of a partisan bias.
The texts between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, they are so damning.
They are, Wolf, which is why what Gloria is laying out here, yes, that is Strzok's mission today, is try to walk this line of, I have personal political views, it didn't impact my work at all. That may be true, but when he says that those texts, quote, not indicative of bias, that's just flat wrong on its face. It is indicative of bias. I understand his point is, well, that bias didn't infiltrate into my work, into my conduct in the professional capacity, but you can understand why, when you look at the language of those texts, that it's very easy to point to a bias that this FBI agent was expressing. I mean, it sort of goes to the sort of rule that exists. You should put nothing in text or email that you are not comfortable seeing on the front page of the New York Times or on CNN's banner across the bottom of the screen there. He didn't follow that rule, and so now he's in this position. Gloria is right to note that he remains defiant. He has not apologized in any way for this behavior or expressing these things. He's just trying to make this case, but I think it's a tough case for him to make because of the simple nature of those texts.
And it's a very tough case, Jim Shooter, to make when we know that Robert Mueller, the special counsel, fired him after learning about all these texts.
That's right. I think in this hearing you have America and the Mueller investigation in a nutshell, right? Because you have on the one side some Republicans, not all Republicans, because many Republicans say that let Robert Mueller continue to do his work. He's not biased. We trust him, etc. But some Republicans, and certainly the president, argue that the investigation has been biased from the beginning, and that these messages between Strzok and the woman he was having an affair with are proof of that bias. On the other side, you have Democrats, but also crucially the FBI, because even FBI officials that this president has appointed, Chris Wray among them, say that the bias expressed in those text messages do not reflect the broader institution, and that as Peter Strzok made the point in his testimony today, he had many people above him and many people below him who were different. You know, essentially making the argument, if you don't believe I don't have bias, it's a big organization and people are dedicated to their job.
That was the conclusion that Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General, had at the same time.
And he made, that's the thing. So that's essentially, so it's not, it is a political divide, but it's not purely political, right? Because you also have the FBI itself, which is an organization led by Republican appointees, which has Republicans and Democrats among its ranks, saying that yes, there's evidence of bias here, but that the institution as a whole has many folks at senior levels, many appointed by Trump, et cetera, who do their job without letting that bias get in the way. Now, the trouble is, as David and Gloria were saying, these texts are, on the face of it, very damning evidence, and they give ammunition to the president and those who make this claim that, look at it, it's right here in clear, text form, that from the beginning there were folks here who had it in for the president.
Laura Coates, you're our legal analyst. I want to get the legal perspective on what we're seeing right now, because potentially there could be charges filed.
There could be. On the one hand, as you're all saying, Peter Strzok is asking the nation to compartmentalize or allow him to compartmentalize. On the other hand, the Republicans who are his adversaries in this hearing are asking American people to conflate these two issues. Because at the same time that he is back, on his defensive talking about what happened with the Clinton investigation, the focus of the witch hunt statement is about the Mueller probe. And as you said yourself, Wolf, it was Mueller who had the foresight to say, this will be a problem. You cannot be a part of my probe and my team any longer. And so going forward, we'd look at this issue in two different chunks of time. One about whether he violated FBI policy by one using the professional phone as a device to talk about personal issues and bias and call into question the objectivity of the FBI, which is a very big problem going forward. On the other hand, it's the idea of how does this impact the Mueller probe? And because of Mueller's decision not to interview him extensively, not to talk to him about why he made the effort, why he made the statements, what his thought process was behind it, giving an opportunity or a lifeline to continue, you see a clear delineation between when bias could have occurred and when bias was not allowed to enter the equation. So legally speaking, in terms of the Mueller probe, we're still in the objectivity land. When it comes to Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, their own statements were the most damning among them, but it doesn't actually tread into the Mueller probe yet, and that has to be distinguished.
Just to Laura's point, it is clear from what Chairman Goodlatte was saying right before the break, Wolf, that he wants to get into the Mueller probe to start bringing it to there to see if he can inject the allegation of the Strzok bias into the Mueller probe. He said, when we come back from break, you do need to answer our questions about the formation of the probe, the beginning stages of that, not about the ongoing investigation, but how it came to be. And that's what the Republicans are going to try to focus on to connect the two.
Get ready for a fight.
It was not surprising, but the questions and the statements from the Republicans were totally different than their questions and statements from the Democrats.
You know, the Democrats were trying to separate it and make sure that everybody knows that there are lots of checks and balances at the FBI. That Peter Strzok, as he himself said, was not the one making all the decisions. He was involved in the case, but he wasn't the person at the top making the decisions. And the Republicans were saying, look, you were making these decisions. You were deciding that it was more important to go after Donald Trump and the Trump campaign than it was for you to go after Hillary Clinton. What I found sort of stunning, actually, is when Strzok was asked to explain the will stop text, he talked about Trump's attacks on a Gold Star family and talked about how personally abhorrent he felt that was. So in a way, he gave a little more fuel to the folks who were saying, you really hated Donald Trump. I mean, it was very clear from his answer that he did not like Donald Trump. But Mueller didn't ask him. Mueller, and I, knowing what I know about Bob Mueller, I think he probably just called him in his office and said, you're gone.
Because no explanation would have been good. And, you know, he poured, also on that point, you know, Peter Strzok poured lighter fluid on a lot of the ammunition that people were going to have at the end when he was asked, can you release your personal or give us clearance to release the personal messaging you had? He said, well, no, I'm not going to release that. It was very titillating for a lot of the Republicans who were saying, well, there must be so much more that you don't actually want us to see. That confirms the innuendo that not only do you not like Trump because of the Gold Star family attack, but there is something more you're trying to hide, and that's a problem.
And that point is somewhat undermined by the fact that the Republican-led committee will not release the transcript of his private testimony. So, you know, lo and behold, there's a little bit of sanctimony. So some hypocritical sanctimony coming out in this hearing. Imagine that.
A little bit of politics as well. Asha Rangappa is with us, our legal and national security analyst. What was your analysis, Asha, from what you heard?
Well, that was quite a spectacle, for sure. You know, I don't know that we necessarily learned anything new. These are all things that the IG report had gone over, and it's interesting that before the IG report was released, there was a lot of hyping up that this was going to, you know, blow everything wide open, and that was a pretty objective assessment. So I think that this was a lot of performance. I do think it's actually unfortunate that Strzok can't speak to how they opened the investigation, and I think I understand the FBI not wanting him to, but I think it would clarify a lot about how bias couldn't even really make it into an investigation when it's opened, because of the way that you have to articulate your factual basis for opening an investigation. You can't just say, hey, I have a hunch, or I feel this way. You have to actually point to things that you've observed or seen. So we can't get that information, but I think that would be clarifying and take us out of the realm of just talking about his texts.
Josh Campbell, you're a former FBI supervisory agent. I assume you worked at some point, or at least crossed paths with Peter Strzok. What was your reaction?
Hey, Wolf. Hi, Asha. So we all know that congressional oversight is messy, it's complex, sometimes it's contentious, but I think that this is hard to watch because, you know, what we're seeing here is essentially 3 ships that are passing in the night, and they're not only moving in different directions, but they're operating on completely different dimensions. If you think about the purposes they have, you know, they're blowing off steam. You have Republicans that are really tired of not getting answers to a lot of their questions, so they're letting that be known. You have Democrats who are just tired of all the nonsense here in the charades, trying to call that out. And then you have Peter Strzok, who you mentioned, I work with the FBI headquarters, who is now finally having an opportunity to, explain for himself what happened because he's tired of his personal opinions or personal reputation being besmirched. So you have all that happening at one time, but I don't think that actually serves the American public because they're not learning anything that's really new. What I think we should be seeing, instead of all this grandstanding, is really taking a lot of this time to extract that important information from a very important witness, Wolf.
Good point. We're going to have a lot more on this coming up, but there's other important news we're following as well, including major protests set to erupt in the UK as the British Prime Minister gets ready to greet President Trump. We'll go there live. Stick around for that. Also, the North Koreans failing to show up for a scheduled, very important meeting with U.S. officials, and it's fueling deep skepticism right now about their intentions in the nuclear talks. Also, the president releases a letter from Kim Jong-un, and just in, charges have just been dismissed against Stormy Daniels after her arrest overnight. We have details.
Every time the mailman comes, he thinks it's his bark box. Get $40 worth of toys, treats, and shoes for as low as $21 a month. Subscribe today and save at barkbox.com.
Have you been told you need neck or back surgery? If so, you do have a choice. Call Laser Spine Institute and say yes to a pain-free life with our minimally invasive spine surgery. It's safer than open back surgery, letting you get back to living life on your terms.
I can lift my son high over my head again.
If you have spinal stenosis, bulging or herniated disc, sciatica, or other chronic spine conditions,
call 1-800-216-BACK now for your free MRI review.
Thanks to a less than 1-inch incision, you'll be up and walking within hours of surgery, so you can get back to your life in days instead of months.
I feel like Laser Spine Institute was an answer to prayer.
Join the thousands of people every year who say goodbye to chronic neck and back pain with Laser Spine Institute. Make today the day you say yes to living a pain-free life.
Call 1-800-216-BACK now for your free MRI review.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The finest luxury items at up to 90% off retail. Every item authenticated by our experts. Only at The Real Real. Get 20% off when you enter REAL at therealreal.com and in store.
Need a change of scenery? The Kayak Price Forecast tool tells you whether to wait or book your flight now, so you can be confident you're getting the best price. Giddy up. Kayak. Search one and done.
Salonpas. We're the world leader in medicinal pain patches. Our latest innovation, Salonpas Lidocaine, using hydrogel-based technology with the maximum strength lidocaine you can buy without a prescription. Salonpas Lidocaine. Nothing is proven stronger or more effective against pain.
I'm only in my 60s. I've got a nice long life ahead. Big plans. So when I found out Medicare doesn't pay all my medical expenses, I looked at my options. Then I got a Medicare supplement insurance plan.
If you're eligible for Medicare, you may know it only covers about 80% of your Part B medical expenses. The rest is up to you. Call now and find out about an AARP Medicare supplement insurance plan insured by United Healthcare Insurance Company. Like all standardized Medicare supplement insurance plans, it helps pick up some of what Medicare doesn't pay and could save you an out-of-pocket medical costs.
Don't ask how I got this number. We met a while ago, I think. Or we should have done. There's a new property on Mays Bank foreclosures I'm pretty sure you're going to find interesting. 87% sure according to our current algorithms.
Plus,
it's an underground bunker, manufacturing facility, and money-making opportunity. Take a look on the site.
Decision guide to help you better understand Medicare and which AARP Medicare supplement plan might be best for you. There's a wide range to choose from.
We love to travel, and there's so much more to see. So we found a plan that can travel with us anywhere in the country.
Join the millions of people who have already enrolled in the only Medicare supplement insurance plans endorsed by AARP, an organization serving the needs of people 50 and over for generations. Remember, all Medicare supplement insurance plans help cover what Medicare doesn't pay and could save you in out-of-pocket medical costs. Call now to request your free decision guide and learn more about the kinds of plans that will be here for you now and down the road.
I have a lifetime of experience, so I know how important that is.
Closed captioning brought to you by OnlyMeso.com.
Mesothelioma, it's all we do. With 7 offices across the country, let us come meet with you. Call us at 1-800-213-8000.
Your testimony is Bob Mueller did not kick you off because of the content of your text. He kicked you off because of some appearance that he was worried about.
My testimony, what you asked and what I responded to, was that he kicked me off because of my bias. I'm stating to you it is not my understanding that he kicked me off because of any bias, that it was done based on the appearance. If you want to represent what you said accurately, I'm happy to answer that question, but I don't appreciate what was originally said being changed.
I don't give a damn what you appreciate, Agent Strzok. I don't appreciate having an FBI agent with an unprecedented level of animus working on 2 major investigations during 2016.
I can assure you, Mr. Chairman, at no time in any of these texts did those personal beliefs ever enter into the realm of any action I took. Furthermore, this isn't just me sitting here telling you, you don't have to take my word for it. At every step, at every investigative decision, there are multiple layers of people above me, the assistant director, executive assistant director, deputy director, and director of the FBI, and multiple layers of people below me, section chiefs, supervisors, unit chiefs, case agents, and analysts, all of whom were involved in all of these decisions. They would not tolerate any improper behavior in me any more than I would tolerate it in them. That is who we are as the FBI. And the suggestion that I, in some dark chamber somewhere in the FBI, would somehow cast aside all of these procedures, all of these safeguards, and somehow be able to do this is astounding to me. It simply couldn't happen. And the proposition that that is going on, that it might occur anywhere in the FBI, deeply corrodes what the FBI is in American society, the effectiveness of their mission, and it is deeply destructive.
Just one example of a rather testy exchange.
I know you don't care about optics, but maybe taking some garage space in the building might be the message we need to send. Plus, it's actually really cool.
Part of this investigation. Let's get some analysis on this and other issues. Republican Congressman Chris Stewart of Utah is joining us. He's a key member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, what's your reaction to this hearing so far? I don't know how much of it you've seen, but it's very, very tense.
Yeah, it is testy, I think is a good description. I haven't been able to watch all of it, obviously. I've been able to see parts of it. I actually cleared my schedule a little bit so I could have some time to look at it. Wolf, I think that Peter Strzok has got a problem. And that is, you can't say the things that he said in what he thought was a private email where he could express himself honestly. You can't say you smelled Trump voters. You can't call them backward redneck hillbillies. You can't express that kind of animus and really hatred, not just a few times, but dozens, if not hundreds, and then stand before the American people and say, as he said, well, that wasn't really how I felt. And if it is how I felt, it didn't impact my work. Oh my gosh, if this was a juror and you were a defense attorney, would you allow this juror to sit on a panel when they've expressed this kind of animosity towards someone they were supposed to investigate?
He did make the point, Congressman, that he could have exposed the entire investigation into then Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump in the summer of 2016. And he didn't expose that investigation was underway for alleged collusion, as they say. He says that was proof that maybe his personal opinions did not affect his work. Does he have a point?
Well, I mean, if it's a point, it's a very dull one. I mean, the fact that he didn't commit crimes doesn't mean that he wasn't influenced by his own prejudice and his own bias. And I also think, Wolf, to be fair, that when you look at not just what he said and look how he feels, we don't know. I'm talking about the outcome of these 2 investigations. I think he could certainly create a case that this individual and maybe a few others around him were very sympathetic towards Hillary Clinton, and that was reflected, and were very antagonistic toward the president, and that was probably reflected as well. I think you could argue that, but I guess time will tell us as time goes on.
Yeah, Yeah, this hearing is going to be continuing. We'll continue, of course, to have coverage of it. Let me get to the NATO summit that has just wrapped up, Congressman, while I have you. As you know, President Trump lashed out at some of America's closest allies, accusing Germany specifically of being a, quote, captive of Russia. Is talk like that towards U.S. allies and friends really beneficial?
Well, it probably, on the surface, I understand why people are questioning that, and frankly, I do as well. It's one of those circumstances where, were I president, I wouldn't have said it probably in that way. But the outcome of this is what I'm more interested in. And in my heavens, for years, I and others, and the president more recently, as he's begun to campaign and act as president, we pointed out something that's just very obvious, and that is NATO has not carried their share of the weight. When I was a pilot flying in the Air Force, I loved my NATO brothers and sisters, but they were not capable of going to war with us the way that we hoped they would be. And it's because they simply didn't fund their own self-defense the way that we needed them to. I think it's perfectly appropriate for the president to point that out. And though he does it again in ways that perhaps you and I wouldn't, if we get a better outcome, if they're willing to take more of that burden and say, we'll carry some of the responsibility for defending Europe, our own backyard, I think that's a positive thing.
But wouldn't it be more effective to have these kinds of serious discussions with NATO allies behind closed doors, quietly? A public rift developing which only plays into the hands of the Russians and Putin, who want to see the U.S.
As I've said, as my role on the Intel Committee and other positions in Congress, I've been to Europe many, many times and have had these conversations, and it didn't have any effect. Now, of course, they're not going to listen to me, a little old congressman from Utah, but there's been many others who have tried to persuade them, and again, they didn't respond to that. In this case, they have, and maybe that public pressure made the difference. And the second thing is, the last thing Vladimir Putin wants is for the United States and for NATO to increase their defense spending. That's going to be the outcome here, even though it, some may say it stressed the alliance a little bit. Once again, I think we understand NATO is a foundation for defending democracy in Europe. I don't think that goes away because of some of the things President Trump has said. And in fact, at the end of the day, it's probably strengthened if we better fund NATO's military expenditures.
Congressman Chris Stewart, I know you got to vote. Thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Wolf. Thank you.
All right, from blasting NATO allies to taking a softer tone when it comes to the Russian president, Republican Ohio Governor John Kasich, he's standing by to weigh in on the latest statements, the latest diplomacy from the President of the United States.
Hi, I'm Joan London with A Place for Mom, the nation's largest senior living referral service. For the past 5 years, I've spoken with hundreds of families and visited senior care communities around the country. And I've got to tell you, today's senior living communities are better than ever. These days, there are amazing amenities like movie theaters, exercise rooms and swimming pools, public cafes, bars and bistros, even pet care services. And nobody understands your options like the advisors at A Place for Mom. These are local expert advisors that will partner with you to find the perfect place and determine the right level of care, whether that's just a helping hand or full-time memory care. Best of all, it's a free service. There is never any cost to you. Senior living has never been better, and there's never been an easier way to get great advice. Call today. A Place for Mom. You know your family. We know senior living. Together, we'll make the right choice.
Hi, I'm Oleg. I use Thumbtack so much, they asked me to be in a commercial. I got my hedges trimmed. I got my carpets cleaned. I even remodeled my entire kitchen. Just download the Thumbtack app and get prices from local pros for free. Thumbtack.com.
Though fear looms as an ever-present voice of doubt in our minds, it is imperative that we always remember.
The greatest journeys of our lives start with one step. The greatest joys start with one leap. The greatest love starts with one hug. And the greatest miracles start with one gift.
Would you start a miracle with your gift today? When you do, you'll be inspiring kids like us to start the greatest journeys of our lives. Journeys filled with love, joy, hope.
These kids' journeys, along with 1.3 million more, have been started because Shriners Hospitals for Children has taken care of their medical needs.
But we can't do it without you.
Your gift, no matter how small,
can inspire a kid like me.
Like me.
And me. When you give today, we'll send you this adorable Love to the Rescue blanket as a thank you. And a reminder of the love you gave to a kid just like me.
Because of generous people like you,
I will continue my journey.
I will dare to leap again.
I will always be grateful for your gift.
Will you send your love to the rescue today?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias. Your gift inspires us.
Please call or go online now. If operators are busy, please call again or give right away at loveshriners.org.
Hey, this is Alec. You just saw a great story about us kids at Shriners Hospitals for Children. Would you consider writing down the information on your screen so that you can give today? When you go online to loveshriners.org or call to make your gift, you're showing you care. Thank you for giving.
This is CNN's coverage of Election 2000.
The system had never had this kind of stress test before, and it failed. The problem with Bush v. Gore is that it looked so partisan.
The 2000s, Sunday at 9, only on CNN.
Shumash Casino Resort gives away a lot of cars, like this 2018 Jeep Rubicon. So we're shaking things up by throwing in these two Sea-Doos. Think that's huge? Think again, because we're throwing in another Jeep Rubicon, which actually looks kind of lonely without this awesome Can-Am Maverick. It's surf and turf, and it's all worth over $170,000. Play with your Club Indulge card, because July 29, one winner takes all. Only at Shumash Casino Resort.
BOGO. BOGO.
What's a BOGO?
BOGO.
At the Eyeglass Factory, BOGO means buy one, get one free.
BOGO.
That's 2 pair of glasses for as little as $59.
BOGO.
And if your BOGO is $199, your eye exam is included.
BOGO. BOGO. BOGO.
And since every store has a state-of-the-art lab, you'll get real 1-hour service.
BOGO.
Buy a BOGO package for $199 and your eye exam is included. It's not a sale, it's a BOGO.
BOGO.
The Eyeglass Factory, Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Camarillo.
History of Comedy, Sunday at 10 on CNN.
That's dirty.
Right now, President Trump is in the United Kingdom, moments away from meeting with his British counterpart, the Prime Minister Theresa May, and just hours removed from an eye-opening appearance at the NATO summit in Brussels. The president declaring victory over American allies with his demand for greater spending, defense spending. Here are some of the highlights from the president's rather lengthy news conference wrapping up the NATO summit. Listen.
Tremendous progress has been made. Everyone's agreed to substantially up their commitment. They're going to up it at levels that they've never thought of before. They have a very, very powerful, very, very strong NATO, much stronger than it was 2 days ago. If you ask Secretary General Stoltenberg, he gives us total credit, meaning me, I guess, in this case, total credit. He thanked me, actually. He actually thanked me. And everybody in the room thanked me. Germany's coming along, and we still have to figure out what's going on with the pipeline. I brought it up. Nobody brought it up but me, and we all are talking about it now. I think I probably can, but that's unnecessary. In a sense, we're competitors. Not a question of friend or enemy. He's not my enemy. That was on Barack Obama's watch. That was not on Trump's watch. I said I'm going to a few hotspots. We have NATO, then we have the UK, and then we have Putin. And I said, Putin may be the easiest of them all. I think they like me a lot in the UK. Brexit is Brexit. And I think that's why you have Brexit in the first place, because of immigration. I have Turnberry in Scotland, which is a magical place. I have property in Ireland. I have property all over. There have been no rocket launches. There have been no missile tests. There's been no nuclear tests, no explosions, no nothing. President Xi spent 2 days there. It was among the most magical 2 days I've ever lived. We got 306 electoral votes. We had a great night. I'm very consistent. I'm a very stable genius.
That's it, a 40-minute news conference in 90 seconds. Some of the highlights there. You see some video from the President and the First Lady walking down the stairs, Air Force One, now in London, getting ready for the next round of talks that the president is having. Let's bring in Governor John Kasich, Republican of Ohio, who's been watching all these things unfold. What's your reaction to what the president said this morning about NATO, and in fact gloating that he got exactly what he wanted?
I think, Wolf, it's undeniable that our relation with our NATO countries is fraying. This has been a relationship since World War II where we've invested a lot and worked a lot with our allies that share our values, and it's kept the peace for 70 years. And I think at times the president has engaged in a wrecking ball diplomacy, which, you go in, you wreck everything up, and then at the end you declare great things. But pushing them on burden sharing is good. There's no increase about what was agreed to a few years ago. Maybe accelerating it, give the president credit for that. But if you take the withdrawal from the Paris Accord, the unilateral effort around Iran, when you take a look at the tariffs that have been imposed on our allies based on national security grounds, our withdrawal from the PTT trade agreement, I mean, it's just one thing after another, and the G7 summit where they couldn't even reach a communique. I'm not here to personally attack the president, but I'm here to disagree with what I think is a foreign policy initiatives that I think are undermining the strength of something that's kept the peace for 70 years.
Diplomats from the NATO allies are calling the president's performance at the NATO summit disgraceful, destructive, and embarrassment to the United States. Do you agree?
Well, I don't want to use that kind of harsh rhetoric, but what I am saying is when you are doing these things unilaterally, when you are raising questions about, for example, Germany under Angela Merkel, who grew up in East Germany, when you go in and rock the boat in a wrecking ball style and you can't reach agreement at a G7 summit, then, it begins to weaken our ability to be together. NATO is not stronger, it's more frayed. Now, can it change? Can the president change direction? Can we repair this relationship? It's vital, because if it is not repaired, it weakens us. And we need our allies. We work together as a team. We have since World War II.
The president was asked by a reporter at that 40-minute news conference if the U.S. could walk away from NATO without congressional action. As you know, and you were a member of the House of Representatives for a long time. The president said probably he thinks he could. What do you think?
Well, I don't know about that, but what I will tell you is we finally are hearing some peeps out of Republicans in the Congress of the United States. The United States Senate reaffirmed U.S. commitment to NATO, not any hesitation whatsoever. I think it passed the House as well. They also have registered...
It was a 97-2 vote in the Senate, and it passed the House by voice vote.
Okay, and that means unanimously. And then the Senate took action on tariffs, these unilateral actions against our friends based on...
88 to 11.
Okay.
Criticizing the administration.
They're finally beginning to say something. So, the bottom line on all this is that I think that, look, my purpose is to say the president's got his foreign policy views. I, as a leader in my party and in the country and in my state, have an ability to express my foreign policy views. It's not personal. It's based on what I think advances America, our allies. Wolf, I have relatives, my uncle, my father. One of my uncles fought at Iwo Jima. Why'd they fight? Human freedom. Freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. These are the values that people are willing to die on a battlefield for. And there are allies over there who joined us and work with us. We have allies in Afghanistan. They've been in Iraq. They stand with us. And frankly, we're going to need their support as we confront a China that is becoming much more aggressive, including in stealing our intellectual property. We need friends. We need strength. We don't need to have divisions.
We got a lot more to discuss, Governor. Stick around. We're going to continue our conversation, including the North Koreans now dramatically failing to show up for a scheduled meeting with U.S. officials, and it's fueling skepticism about their intentions in the nuclear talks. Also, the president releases a letter he just received from Kim Jong-un. We'll have details.
I'll be waiting for you.
Join T-Mobile and get Netflix included for the whole family, so you can get lost in space in your own backyard. Or get pumped up for your grand entrance. Only T-Mobile lets you watch your favorite movies and shows in more places without paying more. Get an unlimited family plan with Netflix on us. And right now at T-Mobile, buy one Samsung Galaxy S9 and get one free.
Every time the mailman comes, he thinks it's his bark box.
Get $40 worth of toys, treats, and shoes for as low as $21 a month. Subscribe today and save at BarkBox.com.
Bark! Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh is the best of the best. His life has been defined by hard work and excellence. A star student at Yale Law, he went on to clerk on the Supreme Court. After working in the White House, Brett Kavanaugh became a judge, confirmed with bipartisan support. Strong and independent, he applies the Constitution just as it was written. Like Neil Gorsuch, he'll be another great justice. Confirm Kavanaugh.
I have type 2 diabetes. I'm trying to manage my A1C. Then I learned type 2 diabetes puts me at greater risk for heart attack or stroke. Can one medicine help treat both blood sugar and cardiovascular risk? I asked my doctor. She told me about non-insulin Victoza. Victoza is not only proven to lower A1C and blood sugar, but for people with type 2 diabetes treating their cardiovascular disease, Victoza is also approved to lower the risk of major CV events, such as heart attack, stroke, or death. While not for weight loss, Victoza may help you lose some weight.
Victoza is not for people with type 1 diabetes or diabetic ketoacidosis. Do not take Victoza if you have a personal or family history of medullary thyroid cancer, multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2, or if you are allergic to Victoza or any of its ingredients. Stop taking Victoza and get medical help right away if you get a lump or swelling in your neck or symptoms of a serious allergic reaction such as rash, swelling, difficulty breathing or swallowing. Serious side effects may happen, including pancreatitis. So stop taking Victoza and call your doctor right away if you have severe pain in your stomach area. Tell your doctor your medical history. Gallbladder problems have happened in some people. Tell your doctor right away if you get symptoms. Taking Victoza with the sulfonylurea or insulin may cause low blood sugar. Common side effects are nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, decreased appetite, indigestion, and constipation. Side effects can lead to dehydration, which may cause kidney problems.
Change the course of your treatment. Ask your doctor about Victoza.
We all have our piece of the planet. Some big, some not so big. But it's ours. We take care of it. That's where CLR comes in. It dissolves calcium, lime, and rust using ingredients for safer chemistry. It even carries the EPA's Safer Choice seal. Let CLR do the hard work. Just loosen and rinse. For your little piece of the planet, trust CLR, making the world a little cleaner.
Introducing Garbage Disposal Cleaner. Go to CLRbrands.com for more information.
Angie's List has collected millions of verified reviews of local home service providers, and now they're free for everyone to read. Angie's List makes it easy for you to find top quality service providers in your area for any type of home project. Search for a great pro in your area, or let Angie's List instantly match you to a few who can do the job. To get the most reviews from real customers, all for free, go to angieslist.com today.
Any object, any surface. If you've got a life, you've got a Swiffer.
Closed captioning brought to you by Thunderease, calming pheromones for pets.
Thunderease mimics the cat and dog's own natural pheromones.
It's vet recommended and 100% guaranteed.
He just completely chilled out.
Thunderease.
The Trump administration says most of the youngest children separated from their parents at the border have now been reunited. The administration says as of today, 57 children under the age of 5 had been reunited. 46 have not been reunited, they say, because of issues involving the parents. A federal judge had ordered that all the children under 5 be reconnected with their mothers and fathers. 2 days ago, earlier this week, President Trump said there's a simple way to prevent this problem.
Well, I have a solution. Tell people not to come to our country illegally. That's the solution. Don't come to our country illegally. Come like other people do. Come legally.
Republican Governor John Kasich of Ohio is still with us. What's your reaction to that? About 100 kids under the age of 5 were separated. Maybe half have been reunited, but another 3,000 children under the age of 17 and under, in the next 2 weeks, they're supposed to be reunited, and it's a problem.
Wolf, I mean, in America, we find this hard to believe. And people of all stripes, Republicans, Democrats, and even the faith people who have been, so allegiant to the president, have all spoken out against the policy of separating families. And let's say a couple things. So I'm a mom down in Guatemala. I've got drug lords, gangs. They're threatening to kill my son or rape my daughter. I'm going to apply for asylum. I'm not going to stay in Guatemala. I can't have, my life is at risk. So I come to the United States and seek asylum. What we need are more asylum judges. We have to have facilities when parents come here with their kids. When people are refugees, they need to be housed. We need to find out if they're at risk. Now, in addition to that, yes, we need to do things at the border. But we need a bigger strategy than that. We got to get to the root of the problem, like we did in Colombia. Not that it's perfect there, but we need to invest both militarily and economically with our neighborhood, with the Guatemalans, the El Salvadorians. We need to help Mexico get on its feet. We need to stop all this crime, these drug cartels which are flooding our country. We need to go to the root of the problem, not with another, big federal program, but an exact program, a targeted program that relies on their leaders to get on their feet. And we have to do something to make sure we protect our border.
You have confidence this administration
Not right now. I don't see anything. I haven't seen any administration really talk about this. This gets to the root of the problem, what is happening in our neighborhood. Now, for people that come here, if they're seeking asylum because their family's being threatened, might be killed, think about what it's like in our country when you feel threatened. You get out of the neighborhood. That's what they're doing. And that's what the whole purpose of refugees and asylum is. If you have a legitimate complaint, you get to come in here. In the process of being determined, you don't want to take people's kids away. And I know there are people that say, well, they brought this on themselves. Folks, we're all humans. Think about what it would be like if your family got put into this kind of a position, or if your children were separated from you. So the administration had this policy. Now guess what? They're back to the old policy that they said was not acceptable, and that's basically what they're doing, catch and release. So deal with the problem in the whole neighborhood. Make sure you strengthen the border. Stop the drugs, because the drugs are a big problem coming in. But you got to get to the root cause of this.
A quick question before I let you go, Governor. Congressman Jim Jordan. Yeah. He was an assistant wrestling coach at Ohio State University a couple decades or so ago. Now some are accusing him of knowing about sexual abuse by someone else on that wrestling team. I know this is a big issue in Ohio right now. What's your analysis?
Well, first of all, there's a law firm, reputable, that's doing an investigation. We, of course, when we looked at Michigan State or Penn State, we feel terrible for the athletes. For Jim Jordan, he's always been pleasant with me. I'm not a close friend, but we are friends. And when I heard this, I was sad. In fact, I said a prayer that this would pass, that this would all be resolved. But you also have an investigation, and what I hope will happen at the end of the day is the athletes will be taken care of and Jordan will be cleared. I hope. We'll see how it all unfolds.
Yeah, he's not, and just to be precise, he hasn't been accused of any sexual abuse himself. He's only been accused, as some of the wrestlers, of knowing or should have known about this and not doing anything.
Well, in this business of politics now, we tend to be, because you're on different sides or whatever, we tend to demonize. We stop doing it. We all have to be thinking for the best outcome for all of our friends and neighbors. Wolf, this whole business of rooting against people and tearing people down, it's just not a good way to build a stronger country.
Governor, thanks so much for coming in.
Wolf, always a pleasure. Great to be with you.
You want to be president of the United States?
Well, I don't have my own job now. I'm governor of Ohio. And Ed Koch once said, wait a minute.
This is not a difficult question. Do you want to be president of the United States?
Would I like to be? Yeah, but you have to earn that. And I didn't get elected, and I tried to run. But you know what? Ed Koch ran for governor of New York, and he didn't win. And on election night, he said, I'm not governor of New York, but I'm mayor of New York, and that ain't bad.
But I think you said yeah when I asked you if you want to be president of the United States.
Of course, I would love to be in a position to be able to help our country, but so what? There's a long distance between that and how you get there. I also, by the way, would like to play on the PGA Tour. I don't think that's in my future.
I have no idea how good you are. Hey, Governor, thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, Wolf.
Right now, we're getting some live pictures coming in from London where protesters are gathering ahead of President Trump's visit with the British Prime Minister Theresa May. We'll have a live report.
PS3.
And fireworks here in Washington up on Capitol Hill as lawmakers grill the FBI agent who sent anti-Trump text messages during the campaign. The hearing about to begin, to resume, I should say, any minute. We'll have live coverage. Stay with us.
I'm Jesse James Decker, and if y'all want to know how I stay in shape, I do it with a brand new South Beach diet.
You can lose up to 9 pounds and 3 inches in your first 2 weeks. Lose weight and get into the best shape of your life.
I lost 24 pounds on the South Beach diet.
I'm in the best shape of my life. Trust me, the South Beach diet works.
South Beach is a low-carb, low-sugar, high-protein, fat-burning program that transforms your metabolism.
South Beach makes eating healthy easy.
Order your 28-day plan of fully prepared meals delivered to your home. You get breakfasts, lunches, dinners, even snacks.
I love the food.
Order now and get a week of our all-new South Beach Complete Shakes free. Packed with 20 grams of protein, probiotics, and vitamins. Call in the next 2 minutes and we'll even throw in free shipping.
Lose weight and get in great shape with the all-new South Beach diet. Call or go online right now.
Call 844-429-SAND or go to southbeachdiet.com and get 1 week of shakes free.
Hi, I'm Joan London with A Place for Mom. Every day we hear from families who partnered with a senior living advisor from A Place for Mom to help find the perfect place for their mom or dad.
Thank you so much for your assistance in helping us find a place. Mom feels safe and comfortable and has met many wonderful residents and staffers.
Thank you for helping our family find our father a new home. We especially appreciate the information about the VA Aid and Attendance Program.
I feel I found the right place, a perfect fit. You were my angel and helped guide me every step of the way. Thank you.
The senior living advisors at A Place for Mom partner with thousands of families every month, listening and offering local knowledge and advice to help find the best senior living communities across the country. And it won't cost you a cent. This is a free service. Call today. A Place for Mom. You know your family. We know senior living. Together, we'll make the right choice.
Right now, protests over President Trump's visit to the UK are getting underway. Let's quickly go to our senior international correspondent, Nick Payton-Walsh. He's in London. He's talking to people in the crowd. So, Nick, first of all, will the president actually see the demonstrations?
It'll be tough for him not necessarily to hear this because they are probably about 300-400 yards away from where we've just seen his Osprey rotor vehicles and 2 helicopters land. We believe obviously that's his transport to Blenheim Palace, 60 miles north of where I'm standing in the northwest, where he will meet British Prime Minister Theresa May. What's extraordinary, Wolf, is how pains have been taken to keep him away from central London. This is the part of the city he will actually see, and it's all been fenced off behind this intensive security apparatus, a fence which we now have about 200 or 300 protesters massing around. Important not to overstate the size here, but they're noisy. Some of them are hitting the fence with sticks quite gently. This is not threatening by any means, but the slogans are quite clear. Orange is the new Nazi is what I've seen behind me. No to racist Trump. Trump for prison is another use of the Trump for president sign we've seen in the campaigns too. But this is potentially just the beginning, Wolf, because it's tomorrow that a capital you would normally expect to see in lockdown because of security measures to assist a presidential tour around the capital. That will in fact be in lockdown because of protests merely about Trump's presence. 50,000 possibly, but this behind me, I'm sure he'll hear some of it. Whether he'll care or not about what they have to say, unclear, but it is really the message, frankly, from London, the cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic heart of the United Kingdom, about how they feel about the US president. Wolf.
All right, Nick Payton-Walsh on the scene for us. We'll stand by with you. Other important news, we're following a snub today by North Korea, and it's raising deep concerns about talks involving denuclearization. U.S. officials were supposed to meet with North Korean officials at the demilitarized zone. The meeting was to discuss the repatriation of U.S. soldiers' remains from the Korean War, but the North was a no-show. Let's bring in our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto. It's a big deal. They've scheduled a meeting, and all of a sudden, the North Koreans don't show up.
And it's the second snub, right? Because when Secretary of State Mike Pompeo went to North Korea, to Pyongyang, he was supposed to meet with Kim Jong-un himself.
Kim Jong-un did not show up for those talks. And more importantly, it gets to the substantive issues here. They were supposed to discuss the repatriation there today of U.S. soldiers' remains from the Korean War, which is something that the president already claimed a couple of weeks ago to have achieved from these talks, and yet, you know, still stumbling blocks here. The other thing, of course, the president advertising the letter that Kim Jong-un sent to him, and we should note, I think 6 days ago, one, in this letter, the word denuclearization is not mentioned once. No commitment here. And, of course, since then...
So July 6th letter that they released today, and since the July 6th, a lot of stuff has happened, not good in terms of U.S.-North Korea relations.
The phrase I think they used the very next day was the gangster-like tactics of the U.S. in these negotiations. The bottom line is there is nothing hard that has been conceded by the North Koreans since the summit in Singapore.
The fact that, as you point out, Kim Jong-un refused to receive directly the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on his third visit to Pyongyang, and now they don't show up for what should have been just standard talks. Significant developments.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks so much. We're going to continue to stay on all of this news. We'll be back at 5 p.m. Eastern in the Situation Room. In the meantime, the news continues right now.
Hello, and thanks for being with us. I'm Anna Cabrera in for Brooke Baldwin, and also with us, John Berman in London for CNN's special live coverage of President Trump's first official visit to the United Kingdom. John.
Anna, the president is here in the United Kingdom. He is on his way to Blenheim Palace, which is not in London. It's about 2 hours away from here. He will attend a special black tie dinner at the birthplace of Sir Winston Churchill. He'll be greeted there by the British Prime Minister Theresa May and her husband. There will be dignitaries, all sorts of pomp and circumstance, special music. In a sense, this will be the most glamorous moment of his visit here. But beyond the pomp and the circumstance, there is also controversy, and we've seen examples of it even so far. Protests near where the president's staying at the ambassador's residence north of here in a different part of London. Protests near Blenheim Palace where the president is today. He's been with Theresa May over the last 2 days at this NATO meeting in Brussels where the president stirred up a great deal of controversy, leaning on America's NATO allies to spend more in their own defense. The president claims he secured promises to do that, although other NATO leaders say, no, we just continue to promise what we've been promising for the last 3 years. Tomorrow, the president has another official meeting with the British Prime Minister and then tea with the Queen at Windsor Castle. You know the president has been looking forward to this, also looking forward to the more formal things. Again, you're looking at live pictures from Blenheim Palace right there where the president will be in about half an hour. We will bring you that event live, including all the glamour. Anna.
Looks like a bluebird day there in England. John Berman, talk to you soon. Let's now turn to the fireworks on Capitol Hill. Testifying publicly for the very first time, former FBI agent Peter Strzok is back in the hot seat, where lawmakers on the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees have been grilling him about those anti-Trump text messages he exchanged with an FBI lawyer during the 2016 campaign. Now, before the recess, we heard explosive criticism and interrogation from Republicans and a scalding defense from Strzok. It speaks to the deep divide in Congress right now over the integrity of the Russia investigation.
Your testimony is Bob Mueller did not kick you off because of the content of your text. He kicked you off because of some appearance that he was worried about.
My testimony, what you asked and what I responded to, was that he kicked me off because of my bias. I'm stating to you it is not my understanding that he kicked me off because of any bias, that it was done based on the appearance. If you want to represent what you said accurately, I'm happy to answer that question, but I don't appreciate what was originally said being changed.
I don't give a damn what you appreciate, Agent Strzok. I don't appreciate having an FBI agent with an unprecedented level of animus working on 2 major investigations during 2016.
I can assure you, Mr. Chairman, at no time in any of these texts did those personal beliefs ever enter into the realm of any action I took. Furthermore, this isn't just me sitting here telling you, you don't have to take my word for it. At every step, at every investigative decision, there are multiple layers of people above me, the assistant director, executive assistant director, deputy director, and director of the FBI, and multiple layers of people below me, section chiefs, supervisors, unit chiefs, case agents, and analysts, all of whom were involved in all of these decisions. They would not tolerate any improper behavior in me any more than I would tolerate it in them. That is who we are as the FBI. And the suggestion that I, in some dark chamber somewhere in the FBI, would somehow cast aside all of these procedures, all of these safeguards, and somehow be able to do this is astounding to me. It simply couldn't happen. And the proposition that that is going on, that it might occur anywhere in the FBI, deeply corrodes what the FBI is in American society, the effectiveness of their mission, and it is deeply destructive.
You could feel the heat from here. Joining us now, CNN senior congressional correspondent Manu Raju, who's been following this hearing closely. Manu, what is your biggest takeaway from all the testimony we've heard so far?
Yeah, this has been one of the most contentious hearings that I have ever covered in my career here covering Capitol Hill. Both sides going after each other in unusually stark and personal terms, at times disrupting the flow of this hearing because of questions that each side views as out of order. Democrats in particular pushing back at what they believe is Republican overreach. And one key aspect of this hearing so far has been Peter Strzok's unwillingness on behalf of the FBI to answer questions about issues involving the Russia investigation. And he said that he was instructed by the FBI attorney not to answer certain questions about an ongoing investigation, and that prompted a furious response from Republicans on this committee. Bob Goodlatte, the Republican chairman, initially threatening to hold Peter Strzok in contempt for not answering those questions, and Democrats pushing back and saying, look, this is an ongoing investigation. Of course he cannot answer these questions. He's been told by the FBI not to do so, and raising their own questions about why Republicans didn't hear hold others in contempt for not answering questions about during other investigations, like Steve Bannon when he testified before the House Intelligence Committee about Russia and would not answer a wide range of questions. That all devolving at the onset of this hearing into what has become an incredibly partisan affair, all the while Peter Strzok pushing back and making a bit of news and explaining one key text that had gotten a lot of scrutiny about saying that, quote, we'll stop it in August of 2016 when he was tweeting that text message with that FBI attorney, Lisa Page, we'll stop it, referring to stop Trump from becoming president. He explained for the first time he was not referring to himself. He was referring to, in his view, the American public for pushing back at what they believe is, quote, what he believed was, quote, disgusting behavior in reference to the president's criticism, then candidate Trump's criticism of Gold Star family, that Khan family, back in the summer of 2016. He said that the American public, he believed, would not put up with that. And that was the context of the text that he sent saying, quote, we'll stop it. Even if the Republicans believe that showed that he was just simply biased and out to stop President Trump from becoming President Trump. Nevertheless, it's clear minds have not been changed. This extraordinarily contentious hearing, and we expect this to go on for several more hours through the course of the day and potentially into the evening, too, Anna.
And we're continuing to look at the live image. We see Strzok has retaken his seat after that recess. We expect the hearing to continue any moment now. Of course, we will go there immediately as soon as it starts back up. But while I have you, Manu, since you have been watching so closely, I mean, I'm reminded that he has already testified with many of these members of Congress previously. He was in the hot seat for 11 hours behind closed doors previously. Presumably, they asked some of these same questions then. Is today really just about the show?
Yeah, exactly. He got a lot of these same questions behind closed doors, and these public hearings are, in a lot of ways, about show. Republicans trying to make the case that they believe that this investigation was biased because of Peter Strzok, even though the Inspector General investigated this whole matter about the Clinton email investigation and said there was no evidence that anyone's individual personal bias affected the outcome of their decision to exonerate Hillary Clinton. Nevertheless, Republicans want to make a very public show of these text messages and expect tomorrow, too, behind closed doors, Lisa Page, that attorney with whom he was having an extramarital affair with and was exchanging all these text messages, she's going to meet with these same two committees behind closed doors tomorrow about those messages as well, and that she eventually could come before a public setting as well. So this is not ending anytime soon. Republicans definitely want to make the case that all this is biased, but we're learning some new details too. Right before the break, Peter Strzok talked to Sheila Jackson Lee, a congresswoman from Texas. He said that he referred to a communication that may have been occurring between a Trump associate and Russians during October of 2016. So we'll try to learn a little bit more about that. as well. So some individual nuggets of information coming out, explanations about some of these texts, but overall the theatrics have really been what dominating this day-long hearing so far, with both sides accusing the other of just turning a blind eye to the truth, and Democrats believing this is all part of an effort to kneecap the Mueller investigation on him.
And on that note, Manu, we did hear him be asked several questions. I believe it might have been from Trey Gowdy, could have been from Goodlaz. Some of the names and people continue to ask questions. It goes back and forth quite frequently, but he was asked questions about the biased text messages and what role those had in his removal from the Mueller investigation. Did we learn any more about what Mueller told him when he was removed from the investigation?
Well,
I'm sorry. Hold your thought, Manu, because they're starting up. Let's listen in. We can come back to it later.
5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Strzok, you were part of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. That's correct?
Yes.
And in that investigation, you were part of the decision for her to and her lawyers to go through emails that were produced during, exclusively used, if you will, during her time as secretary, go through and determine which ones were government and which ones were not, both the classified and unclassified. Is that correct?
I was not.
You were not involved at all?
That's correct.
Okay, but you're aware of it?
I'm aware of their statements to us about how they did it.
And do you think it was okay for Secretary Clinton to determine what could or couldn't qualify for her to turn in under the Federal Records Act?
I can't speak to that. That was a decision, in my understanding, between her and her attorneys. And
okay, but you're aware that in her production she failed to deliver some items that have now been ruled as classified, correct?
I'm aware that we recovered information that was not in the material that she turned over. I don't know if it was her failure, the failure of the attorneys conducting that sort, or simply because she didn't have it. I don't know the answer to that question.
So I bring up something that came up in the previous rounds. So far, only you have determined what should be turned over from your private emails that, or your non-government emails and text, what should be delivered because it was government in nature. You've made that decision.
That's right.
And it's your position that nobody else in the way of a government entity should be able to look over your shoulder, so to speak, and make that decision.
That's right.
So you think it's okay for the target, and you are a target, of an investigation to determine what should be delivered rather than, if you will, the government, right?
Sir, I'm not aware of any investigation of which I'm a target.
Well, you're a target of our investigation. We think that you had a bias and you acted on it. That's been made pretty clear. So I'm going to just ask one series of questions very quickly, if I could. You did a number of texts. All of the texts that are presented to us, as far as I know, came from your government phone, correct?
I believe that to be the case, yes.
So you've made no text available from your private phone, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you ever text on your private phone?
I did.
Did you ever text Lisa Page on your private phone?
I did.
Did you ever text Lisa Page on your private phone similar text to the ones you did on your government phone?
By similar, you mean what?
Commenting on Mr. Trump or Hillary Clinton or anything else political in nature.
I don't specifically recall, but it's probably a safe assumption that yes,
so
I did.
It's likely that they'd be similar.
It's a safe assumption. I don't.
So your personal phone has likely similar text to the ones that we found on your government phone. That's correct?
I would say it has similar expressions of personal belief. Yes.
Okay, so in front of you have a one sheet of paper that was presented to you a few minutes ago, and I'm going to just go to a date and then ask you to read your own words. March 4th, 2016.
You want me to read this?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. OMG, he's an idiot.
May 4th, 2016.
Now the pressure really starts to finish MYE.
July 19th, 2016.
Hi, how was Trump other than a douche? Melania?
July 21st, 2016.
Trump is a disaster. I have no idea how destabilizing his presidency would be.
August 6th, 2016.
I don't believe I wrote this text, sir.
Okay, it's been attributed to you, so we'll go on to the next.
Incorrect.
August 8th, 2016. And I'll preface it by saying this for context. Ms. Page said, not ever going to become president, right? Right?
No, he's not. We'll stop it.
Repeat that again.
No, he's not. We'll stop it.
August 15th, 2016.
I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40.
On October 20th, 2016.
I can't pull away and I defer to the chairman whether
you
or not
can just use one letter if you don't mind.
What the F happened to our country, Lise?
Okay, read it again that way.
Sir, did you not? Was it
I
not
just wanted to hear it
you
one
just
more
want
time.
to hear it for me to repeat it?
Please.
Okay, sir. Sure. Happy to indulge you. I can't pull away. What the F happened to our country, Lise?
Why in the world do you believe that this committee should not ask for the record of similar text from your private account to find out what else you might have said about insurance policies or about the President of the United States or investigation? That is a rhetorical question you need not answer, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, may I nonetheless answer?
You may respond briefly, even though he said it was a rhetorical question.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Congressman, what I think is critical, and I'm glad you brought up a lot of these, because I would like to make the point that
I didn't bring them up. I just asked you to read your own words.
Sir, if I may, what is important is that these texts represent personal beliefs just like those that you'd find on my personal phone. What these texts do not represent is any act, any suggestion of an act, any consideration that we need to do this or not do this. And furthermore, I would encourage you, as I believe I forget who I said this to earlier this morning, you need to read these texts in the context of what was going on at the time. So when I make the comment about Trump having no idea how destabilizing his presidency would be, that came on the heels of a speech where then candidate Trump said he didn't know whether or not the United States should honor its commitment to mutual defense under NATO.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. That's not briefly. Mr. Chairman, in light of these actual...
No.
Give him that opportunity.
Everyone will suspend. I told the gentleman he could answer briefly. He has answered briefly. And
he has not finished answering.
We will now turn to the gentlewoman from Washington, D.C. for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In order to allow this witness to continue, let me ask a question. Mr. Strzok, you are a senior, or were a senior and experienced FBI staff person. Is that not right?
I would consider myself a senior and experienced FBI staff person, yes.
Now, you had been involved in the Mueller investigation of the last election involving Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump at the highest level. Is that not the case?
If you mean by highest level that I had interactions with those cases with the director and deputy director and senior staff of the Department of Justice, yes.
That's what I mean. Now, we've been reading from your personal phone and your official phone. Did it occur to you that your personal political messages, if they became public, might be misinterpreted in light of your role in the investigation?
Congresswoman, to be very honest, I didn't anticipate that because I never thought these texts would become public.
Well, even though they were, some of them were not on your personal phone.
Oh, correct. Yes, that's correct.
So that means anything that's on your official phone, of course, belongs to the public. So I just want to establish that this confusion between your public and private phone is part of our problem here today. Now, as we hold this hearing, I just want to note for the record that President Trump is on his way to a very controversial meeting with Vladimir Putin. Let me ask you, sir, about a undisputed finding of the Intelligence Committee, and by that I mean the CIA, the NSA, the FBI. These people do not usually speak in such absolute terms, so hear them. We assess Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. We further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. We have a high confidence in these judgments. Are these conclusions familiar to you, sir?
They are.
Are you aware of any finding that undermines these conclusions of the three intelligence committees?
I am not.
The Senate committee on the other side of the Capitol, under the leadership of a Republican chairman, Richard Burr, and not split in the way our own intelligence committee here in the House, has made a bipartisan finding affirming the intelligence committee's assessments. And I want to quote just briefly from them that the three committees, the Intelligence Commission assessment is a, quote, sound intelligence product. Now, let me indicate something that I had not known before preparing for this hearing, that they not only cited the usual context here in the United States, they quoted public Russian leadership commentary, Russian media reports, all aligned with the body of our intelligence reporting. Were you aware of the confluence of what the Russians were saying and what our own intelligence sources are saying?
I believe I understand your question to be between the intelligence community sources and methods and open source reporting, including those from Russia. Yes, I was aware of all those things coming together at the same time.
Do you have any reason to believe that the Senate Intelligence Committee or the NSA or the CIA or the FBI or the Office of the Division of Intelligence are on some kind of an effort to discredit President Donald Trump?
The lady's time has expired, but you may answer the question.
No, not at all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from the District of Columbia yields back. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you were involved in investigating both the matter of Hillary Clinton's private email server and the so-called Russian collusion matter. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Ms. Page was also involved in both those. Is that correct?
She was not a member of the investigative team for either. She was a senior staff member for Mr. McCabe, who I believe began...
But somebody you were communicating with on a fairly regular basis on these matters. Thank you. And you would agree, would you not, that both investigations were supposed to be fair and unbiased?
Yes, and that they were.
Yet you were both rooting for Hillary Clinton to win, and you both detested Donald Trump. Did you not?
I think that's fair to say.
And in fact, as we've learned, you apparently found Donald Trump's supporters detestable too, like those around Loudon, Virginia, as we've already heard, whom you called ignorant blanks. I'm not going to say that here. And that you had visited a Southern Virginia Walmart and could smell the Trump support. Now, I have to say, when I read those communications and when I hear them here, those between the two of you, specifically what you had to say about Trump supporters, it reminded me of something that Hillary Clinton had said about Trump supporters. She found them, what did she call them? Deplorables. And I would submit that it was your and Hillary Clinton's smug view of Donald Trump's supporters that was truly deplorable. Don't you think that the American people, when they're paying your salaries, when they're paying for a fair and unbiased investigation by none other than the FBI, deserved a whole lot better than what those comments I just referred to reflect?
Congressman, two things. One, I absolutely regret the appearance of some of those texts and wish I would have said or phrased or not said at all some of the things I did. Two, I disagree completely with your attribution of my views of Trump supporters. I never said that. I expressed no such thing. There are millions and millions and millions of Americans who I deeply respect and honor who voted for Mr. Trump.
Here.
But I just
also, interestingly, you told Ms. Page, and I'll quote here, "I loathe Congress," and she agreed. Now, you're probably in pretty good company there. A survey I saw a while back about Congress found us less popular than root canals and head lice and colonoscopies, and although we did beat out playground bullies and the Ebola virus, but this is not about us. It's about you and whether or not the American people can have the confidence in the investigations that you were involved in, and whether you were fair and unbiased when you investigated both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Would you agree with that?
Sir, I appreciate that concern very much, and let me explain a little bit about that comment. I have the utmost respect for Congress, for its role in oversight, for its role in passing laws, for any of the functions. What I was stating in that comment was the efforts by some to turn legitimate oversight activity into unwarranted criticism of the FBI, for the FBI doing nothing but doing its job.
There's a lot of us up here that don't like Congress particularly, too. So there's probably a lot of the American people, the vast majority would agree with you on that. Mr. Strzok, you were removed from the Mueller investigation, correct?
Yes.
But for the most part, all the others that were there are still there, correct?
I can't speak to the current staffing.
Well, let me tell you who they are. Greg Andrus, who gave $1,000 to the Democrat running to hold the Senate seat previously held by Barack Obama, and $2,600 to Democrat Senator Gillibrand, and $0 to the Trump campaign. He's still there. And Rush Atkinson, who donated to the Clinton campaign, and $0 to the Trump campaign. He's still there. And Kayleigh Freeney, who contributed to both the Obama presidential campaigns and the Hillary Clinton's campaign, and $0 to the Trump campaign, still there. And Andrew Goldstein, who donated $3,300 to both Obama campaigns and $0 to the Trump campaign, still there. And Elizabeth Prelogar, who, by the way, clerked for liberal Supreme Court Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Elena Kagan, and contributed to both the Obama and Clinton campaigns, and $0 to the Trump campaign, still there. And James Quarles, who contributed to the Democratic presidential campaigns of Dukakis and Gore and Kerry and Obama and Hillary Clinton. Now, he did contribute to former Congressman Chaffetz and Allen, but he contributed $20,000 to the Democratic and Senate campaign committees and $0 to the Trump campaigns. I could go on, but I'm just about to run out of time. Suffice it to say that 9 of the 16 investigators still on the case gave to Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or to both, and none gave to Trump. Now, shouldn't such a wide disparity in political support of one party over the other give the American people concern that even though you are off the Mueller team, that the fairness and lack of bias that President Trump deserves and the American people deserve just might be lacking here?
The gentleman's out of time, but the witness may answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, what I'd tell you is this, and what I'd ask you to tell your constituents is this. I have and had no idea what contributions were made by anybody staffing the special counsel's office. What I can tell you and what I'd ask you to relay to your constituents is the men and women that I saw, the attorneys, the agents, the analysts, were the most remarkable, bright, patriotic, hardworking people that I've ever had the honor of working with. I want you to know, and whether people leave here believing me or not, I was absolutely and remained absolutely convinced that the efforts and the personnel who make up the office of the special counsel are the best in America. And I have complete faith and confidence that they will arrive at the truth and that they will do that well.
The gentleman from Ohio yields back. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I don't know where to start. If I could give you a Purple Heart, I would. You deserve one. This has been an attack on you in a way to attack Mr. Mueller and the investigation that is to get at Russia collusion involved in our election, which is what this committee should be looking at. A direct strike at democracy and what this country's about, and free and fair elections, and keeping us independent of who is our foe, not our competitor, our foe. I just returned from the OSCE in Berlin. And there is little question among our allies and people and diplomats throughout Europe that Russia is an antagonistic country that is trying to wreak havoc in the Baltics, in the Balkans as well. They tried to use assassination to try to influence the elections in Montenegro. What they've done in Ukraine with Crimea and the Donbass, what they've done in Georgia, what they've done in Moldova, they are the bad guys. And you've dedicated most of your life to working in counterintelligence. One of your big cases, I think, was Donald Heathfield and Tracy Ann Foley. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was how many Russian folks did you expose and bring to justice?
But that was a long, large investigation that a tremendous number of extraordinary people worked on. There were ultimately, I believe, 10 roughly Russian illegals that were here. But that I started out in the early days and was honored to start out. And again, that ran a decade. And how many Russians were deported for that? Sure, if memory serves, 10 or 11, but I'm not certain on that number. Pretty good case that you worked on. A good job. Did you work on Russia primarily when you were at the FBI in that area? At that period, early on, yes. Are there some things you can tell us about the Russians that maybe we should know before the president meets with Mr. Putin, his very good friend, and a man he cannot say anything bad about? Well, sir, I can speak to my experience as a national security professional in the FBI. The Russians are a top-rate adversary in terms of their foreign intelligence service, in terms of how competently they are able to use their intelligence service to achieve their foreign policy and national security goals, many of which you referenced, their desire, the threat from NATO, trying to undermine the Western alliance, trying to minimize the role and influence and leadership of the United States around the world, attempting to minimize and undermine the extraordinary greatness of our democracy, to make it seem pedestrian and nothing special and on par with their kleptocracy and near dictatorship that they have, to somehow make us seem less. But that's my intelligence perspective. I wouldn't presume to get into a foreign policy. They engage occasionally in assassination they do.
Political rivals?
Yes.
And arrest of journalists for maybe talking and writing about things that the state doesn't believe in?
Yes.
It's not America.
Not at all.
Well, that's unfortunately what the Mueller investigation is looking into, is Russian collusion to influence our election and to influence our politics. And you have dedicated your life to working against that type of involvement and against that type of effort to subvert our democracy and to undermine it. I thank you for that. It's astonishing to me that you would be put on trial as you have today. The beginning of this discussion, this committee meeting, somebody said, we don't want young people to look at the front pages constantly and see things about the FBI that's putting the FBI and the Justice Department in questions and on the front page. Well, I would submit to this committee that the people who are putting that on the front page is this committee, and the people who won't accept what the Investigator General said, that there was no bias involved in the actions of you or others that were investigated. There was found no evidence that the conclusions by the prosecutors were affected by bias or other improper considerations. Rather, we determined they were based on the prosecutor's assessment of the facts, the law, and past department practice. With that as a fact, there's no reason for this hearing. No reason at all. But it puts it on the front page again and again and again. And as you said earlier, the Russians are loving it because this is what they want. This is what they want. You'd think it was Benghazi. It was a never-ending television show from Congress that got nowhere except tried to influence the people that watch Fox News. And that's what this is about. And this is really unfortunate. And as they say, you can put lipstick on a pig, but this is nothing but a ruse to try to get to the Mueller investigation and make people think it's baseless, that it's biased, that it's 13 Democrats that are working on this, and they're prejudiced and they're discriminatory and they're biased because they, just as Jack Nicholson said in the movie, A Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth. And the truth is, this is the most corrupt administration ever, and it's going to be exposed by Robert Mueller. Thank God. I yield back, and I thank you.
The gentleman from Tennessee yields back. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Chairman. Agent Strzok, did you provide any information to reporters, journalists, or media personalities about anything related to Trump-Russia investigation in 2016, 17, or 18?
No.
Yeah.
Did the press ever talk to you, Agent Strzok, about this issue? Did they ever come to you?
The Trump-Russia collusion investigation?
Did the press ever come to you? I'm asking first, did you talk to them? I'm asking now, did they ever come to you about anything related to Trump-Russia investigation in 2016, 2017, or 2018?
I received a number of calls from various members of the media, particularly when I returned from the Office of Special Counsel. In every instance,
prior to going on the Special Counsel team, did you get any inquiries from the press that you took?
Not that I took. I referred them to the Office of Public Affairs of the FBI.
Have you read the dossier?
I have.
Okay, and you wrote about it too, didn't you?
I don't know what you mean by writing about it.
We got an email that you sent. It should be presented there, or should be in front of you there. I want you to take a look at this. This is an email you wrote to Lisa Page, Bill Priestap, Jim Baker, Jim Rubicki, and CC'd Andy McCabe. Subject line is BuzzFeed's about to publish the dossier. You familiar with this email?
I am.
All right. It says this: comparing now, the set is only identical to what McCain had. Parentheses, it has differences from what was given to us by Corn and Simpson. Did you write all that?
Congressman, let me answer it this way. First, if I could address the chairman. Over the break, I was authorized by the General Counsel.
Hang on a second. I just want my time stopped. You could. Are you addressing me or the chairman?
I'd like to address the chairman. The time. This is all going to come together in an answer.
Is there a question you want to direct?
No, it's something I wanted to answer your question from earlier based on something I've been told by the FBI.
Wait.
I think I'm aware of what the FBI told you, and you and I will have another chance to talk about that. But right now, the gentleman from Ohio controls the time.
You wrote this. That was the question.
So, obviously,
wait. Do you see the from?
Congressman, here's
the from line. Do you see the from line?
Congressman, I do.
It says Peter Strzok. And then it says to Lisa Page and a whole bunch of other key people at the FBI. So did you write it?
I did write this.
All right, let me ask you a couple questions about it. It has differences from what was given to us by Corn and Simpson. Who's Corn?
Sir, to answer that question, and I would love to answer that question, and every part of me, and you know why I'd want to answer that question, because you have this information.
Who's Simpson?
I have been, sir, if I may, I cannot answer that question.
You wrote about it. It's now public. Who's Corn? Who's Simpson?
Based on direction by the FBI, sir, I am not able to answer questions about ongoing investigative matters.
I just want to figure this out. Agent Strzok. You're referencing 3 copies of the dossier. The BuzzFeed copy you have, the one John McCain's staff gave to you, and the one that you said you got from Corn and Simpson. The one McCain gave to you and the one BuzzFeed has are identical in your words, but they have the Corn and Simpson one is different.
Sir,
this is kind of important.
It is important, and I want to answer your question. And here's the position that I'm in, Congressman. I have been directed. May I answer your question?
Mr. Chairman, may the witness be permitted?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jordan repeatedly asks a question, doesn't let him answer it.
The gentleman from Ohio controls the time.
I have been directed that I may state that I have read the dossier, that I read the dossier as it came in parts and pieces.
You've already told me you read it.
And
I want to know who Corn and Simpson are.
And, sir, what I'm telling you is that I have been directed I may not state the various places
where
let me ask
you this. I got that. I know what you're saying. Did you ever communicate with David Corn?
No.
Did you ever communicate with Glenn Simpson?
No.
Did you ever communicate with Nellie Orr?
No.
Did you ever communicate with Bruce Orr?
Yes.
When did you communicate with Bruce Orr?
My recollection is somewhere between possibly 3 or 4 or 5 times in the late 2016, early 2017 timeframe.
What did you talk about?
We talked about investigative matters that Mr. Orr was involved in.
Did you talk about the investigation we're focused on here, Agent Strzok?
My direction from the FBI is that I may not answer that question.
I got it. Let's go back to the email that you sent that you won't talk about. Are there 3 copies of the dossier as evidenced by what you said in this email?
Sir, to be clear, I want to talk about this email. I want nothing more than
all you want, but you're not talking about it. You're not answering my questions. Are there 3 copies?
3 copies of what?
The McCain copy, the BuzzFeed copy, and the one that you got from Corn and Simpson.
Sir, the most I can say is we received a variety of copies of and different types of.
Let me ask you one other question. Glenn Simpson testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee on August 22nd, 2017. He was asked, did anyone from Fusion ever communicate with the FBI? His response, no one from Fusion ever spoke with the FBI. So here's what I'm having trouble understanding. If Glenn Simpson says no one ever spoke with the FBI, how is it that you got a copy of the dossier from Simpson?
Sir, I can tell you I never had contact with Fusion, with Mr. Simpson, with Mr. Korn. And again, sir.
Chairman, regular order.
The gentleman will have a few more seconds since he was interrupted.
Well, I mean, this is the frustration that every single member of this committee feels is when Agent Strzok won't answer, well, more importantly, the American people feel when Agent Strzok won't answer fundamental questions like the guy he references in an email, Korn and Simpson, and won't tell me who they are. This is unbelievable, but that's where it's gotten to now, and it's as frustrating as it can get, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Briefly.
Sir, it is as frustrating to me as it is to you. I can tell you, sir, that I would love...
Well, you know what, Agent Strzok?
Mr. Chairman, may the witness be permitted to answer.
If it's so...
If the gentleman will suspend...
If it's so frustrating, answer the question.
If you'll allow him to, well.
He has never answered the question who
Stop
Korn and Simpson are.
We're about
the gentleman instruct the gentleman from Ohio to stop badgering and allow him to answer the question.
We're about to move on. The gentleman from Ohio's time's expired. And we're about to move on where Mr. Strzok can answer a question that he refused to answer earlier on advice of counsel. And I'm going to yield to Mr. Gowdy for the purpose of doing that right now.
Mr. Chairman, before Mr. Gowdy starts, may I respond to Mr. Jordan?
Very briefly.
Very briefly, sir. I would love to do that. There is an appropriate time for oversight, and as you well know, that is at the end of an investigation once it's concluded. I am certain Congress will absolutely have the opportunity to look at any investigation once it's closed, ask all these questions, and I would love to answer each and every one of your questions
Mr.
once
Strzok,
the FBI allows me in the
already
investigation.
know that answer from you, and you have already been advised that you can answer the questions here, because guess what? This is the United States Congress where you're testifying, not under the jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Mr. Chairman, we cannot be asking about an ongoing investigation that is sabotaging an ongoing investigation by this committee, and that's what he's not cooperating with, and we should not do it.
It is,
and he cannot cooperating with that.
These questions are table-setting questions regarding the formation of this, and he can answer those questions, but
he cannot answer questions regarding an ongoing investigation.
That he can, and so Mr. Gowdy's
advised by the FBI that he cannot.
No, he's been advised that he can, and Mr. Gowdy's going to again ask his question.
The gentleman from Ohio has asked for 15 seconds.
So, Agent Strzok, who's being square here? Glenn Simpson says no one from Fusion spoke with the FBI. You say in your email, we got a copy of the dossier from Simpson.
Mr. Chairman, regular order. We will have regular order, and we'll revisit that question. Now the chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Agent Strzok, between July 31st, 2016 and August
Mr. Chairman,
6th.
regular order. This is regular order. The gentleman refused to answer the question earlier. He has now been advised, and I have been advised by the FBI that he may answer the question that was in order earlier, and he's now going to answer the question.
But, Mr. Chairman, Republicans have controlled the time. Now the time goes to the Democrats.
The gentleman will be recognized shortly.
Agent Strzok, between July 31st, 2016 and August 6th, 2016, how many witness interviews did you conduct as part of the Russia-Trump campaign alleged collusion investigation?
I don't recall, and I'd have to check the case file.
We waited all that time for that answer?
Yes, sir.
That's eerily similar to what you said a couple hours ago.
Sir, I am telling you, and I would reject the characterization that I refuse to answer anything. I want to answer these questions.
Well,
I'm going by the direction that I
one.
received from the FBI.
I just asked you one, and I'm looking for a number.
Sir,
I'm looking
is,
for a number.
I do not know without the opportunity to check the case file.
You don't recall in the first week of an investigation that you originated, approved, or the contact person on, you don't recall how many witness interviews you did in the first week?
Sir, I remember that there were interviews conducted. I do not know when they fell on a calendar to be able to tell you whether they were
the last time
set of date or the other. on something that was occurring in the context of a myriad other responsibilities.
When's the last time you looked at the file, Agent Strzok?
Probably going on a year.
For those of us who happened to look at it yesterday, would you disagree that the first interview took place on August the 11th?
I don't know, Congressman. I cannot answer that.
Well, prior to July 31st, 2016, how many witness interviews did you conduct as part of the Russia-Trump campaign alleged collusion investigation?
Thank you.
None.
So none before July 31st, which would be none at the time you said what you said in that text on July 21st.
I don't understand the text you're referring to.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. This is on our time.
Well, no. There are two more questions he didn't.
Right.
He wouldn't answer.
The gentleman will continue.
Between May 17th.
Explain why he can continue in our time.
He can continue. He's not on your time.
Not my personally Democratic time.
It's on our time because he was advised earlier by the FBI that he could not answer the questions, and now he's advised that he can. So the questions will be asked and answered.
Between May 7th.
Parliamentary inquiry. What rules are we following that would dictate such an answer by you, Mr. Chairman?
We are following the rules of the committee.
Could you cite the rule?
No.
No.
Gentlemen will proceed.
Just, Mr. Chairman, point of parliamentary inquiry.
This seems to be well. We're gonna.
I demand.
Mr. Chairman, point of parliamentary inquiry
can continue, but when you do, and the FBI tells him he can't answer a question, and then they change their mind and says he can, we're going to take the time out to do that, and then we're going to continue.
Mr. Chairman, point of parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman
Democratic
from South
members
Carolina
have a right
recognized.
to know what the rules are in governing this hearing.
Gentlemen,
can you share with us
the gentleman
rules
is not
that you're
order.
making up as you go along?
Agent Strzok, between May 17th, 2017 and May 18th, 2017, how many interviews did you conduct as part of the special counsel team?
I don't believe I conducted any.
Between May 17th, 2017 and May 22nd, 2017, how many witness interviews did you conduct in that 5-day period?
Well, so you just went back a year from 2018 to 2017, and I don't know.
2017, May 17th, 2017,
okay.
May 22nd, 2017.
Yeah, I believe you may have said 18, but 17 I don't know.
Whether I did or not, it's the 17th, 2017.
Fair enough, and I don't recall.
Is it blatant, brilliant?
Well, Chairman, I appreciate you letting me make that clear. And again, the context, when you would not answer it, was you used the word impeachment on May the 18th, 2017, and you used the word impeachment on May the 22nd, 2017. And your testimony is you can't recall a single interview you would have done as part of that investigation that was supposed to lead to impeachment. And I think that line of questioning, I'm glad the FBI finally realized it, albeit a couple hours too late. When you are prejudging not just a result, but a punishment, which is what impeachment is. When you are prejudging the conviction and the sentencing, when you have not conducted a single solitary interview, Agent Strzok, but that is letting your bias impact your professional judgment.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Briefly.
Sir, so look. I never prejudged anything. Not in this case, not in any others.
Impeachment for what, Agent Strzok? Impeachment for what?
Second of all,
Mr. Chairman, what are the rules here? Mr. Chairman, what are the rules?
The gentleman will allow the witness to answer the question, and then we'll move on.
Second.
He was given time to respond, and now
at the time I was the Deputy Assistant Director. I have section chiefs, unit chiefs in the field, supervisors, agents, people who typically do interviews, not me. If something is notable or high level, I might be involved, but it would be rare, if never, that I would typically get out there and conduct interviews. First of all. Second, you mentioned the use of the word impeachment. That was used in the context of my not knowing what this would lead to. I was not prejudging impeachment. When I used that term, it was saying it might it might lead all the way to something on the other.
Thank you, Agent Strzok. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Special Agent Strzok. I just continue to be amazed that my colleagues in the majority are more interested in your text messages than they are about the leader of the free world doing everything possible to undermine the Western Alliance. It just amazes me, Special Agent Strzok, as a counterintelligence specialist, you know all too well the pervasive, constant, and growing danger that the Russian Federation poses to this country, our allies, and to democracy in general. It is appalling that my colleagues in the majority continue to relitigate the 2016 election while the president does more damage in the to the Western Alliance than the sum total of all previous Russian and Soviet leaders could have dreamed of. And it is remarkable that Mr. Trump accused our trusted ally Germany of being, and I quote, totally under the control of Russia. I would say that the president is half right. Someone is totally under control of Russia, but it's not Germany. You know, the president should look in the mirror and explain why virtually every decision he makes and every word...
All right, you've been watching the House hearing with Peter Strzok, the FBI agent who sent those anti-Trump texts. This has been a very contentious hearing, but let's go from pyrotechnics to pageantry for a moment. John Berman here in London, about 65 miles northwest of where I am, is Blenheim Palace. This was the birthplace of Sir Winston Churchill, and you're seeing President Trump arrive there for a black tie dinner hosted by British Prime Minister Theresa May. The president pulling up right now in this motorcade. He will be greeted by the Prime Minister, who incidentally has been standing outside for some time, waiting for the president to arrive. In some ways, this is the most pomp and circumstance we will see during the president's stay in the United Kingdom, this black tie dinner. Tomorrow he will have tea with the Queen, but tonight it's the dinner with a full rollout. The band is there. The music will be playing with some special tunes composed just for this occasion. Again, we're waiting to see the president walk out of the car and arrive. There he is, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, arriving at Blenheim Palace. And that is the British Prime Minister Theresa May, along with, I believe, her husband, Philip May. The First Lady, Melania Trump. The president has been with Theresa May for the last 2 days in Brussels as part of the NATO meetings, and we all know how they went. There was a lot of controversy there. The president leaning on the NATO allies to spend more in their own defense. Britain, for what it's worth, actually does spend more than the 2% that the president is calling on all the NATO allies to spend. We can't hear too much. I wanted to listen in to hear if we could pick up anything of this moment. Again, this is a black tie dinner. It's not a state dinner per se, and Blenheim Palace is not a royal palace. It is the one palace in Britain not owned by the monarchy or the church. Nevertheless, it does have great significance as the birthplace of Winston Churchill, is the ancestral home of the Spencer Churchills, gifted to the family of the Duke of Marlborough, the first Duke of Marlborough, way back in the 1700s to honor the Battle of Blenheim over the French and the Bavarians. And I think it was selected for this meal because the Brits know that President Trump is quite fond of Winston Churchill. A lot has been made of the music that we are hearing right now. It was specially composed fanfare by the state trumpeters of the Household Cavalry Band. We're also going to hear music from the bands of Scotch and Irish and Welsh Guards. Look, leaders around the world know that President Trump likes it when they roll out the red carpet for him. And this was the event to prove that, I think, to the president. Again, carefully chosen, specifically with that kind of protocol in mind. As we are watching this, I do want to bring in Jim Acosta right now, who's here in London, not far from Winfield House, where the president has been staying or will be staying here in London, about 65 miles from where he's standing right now. Jim, explain to me exactly where we are on this European journey for the president and what this part of it means.
Well, this is a big part of the trip, John. Obviously, they're rolling out the red carpet here in England, but at the same time, I'm not sure that carpet is any more red than the faces of European leaders across this continent. They're pretty furious with this president after what happened over in NATO, in Brussels, these tense conversations that went on behind closed doors. I think what we're going to see here in the next day or so as the president meets with the British Prime Minister Theresa May and also with the Queen Elizabeth is maybe a little bit of fence mending. We heard from our sources behind the scenes that the president's conversations with these European leaders were very tough on both sides. They were giving and taking over this issue of burden sharing and defense spending. But what we were hearing repeatedly from the British side is that the British, as you said, John, are meeting their commitment of hitting 2% of GDP on defense spending. And they're trying almost to bend over backwards here to say they're with the president on a lot of these issues. I think that really hides and disguises some of the really tense feelings that are prevalent behind the scenes. John, they are very worried about what the president is going to do when he meets with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, Finland on Monday. We've heard that from a number of diplomatic sources. They're worried that the president is going to give away the store, that he's not going to be tough enough on Ukraine, that he's not going to be tough enough on election meddling. And you heard the president address some of those concerns at that news conference that was announced suddenly to the press with about 15 minutes notice earlier this morning in Brussels, where the president said, well, I'm going to bring up election meddling with Vladimir Putin, but I think I know the answer that I'm going to get from Vladimir Putin. That obviously that kind of talk does not sit well with the Europeans, especially when he was asked about the annexation of Crimea from Ukraine, and the president seemed to blame Barack Obama for that, even though it was Putin who orchestrated that invasion of Ukraine, that seizing of Crimea, it took days, weeks, months for the Russians to even acknowledge that. And so there, just all of those reasons, there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of worry on this side of the Atlantic about this president. And what happened at NATO, John, did not really dispel any of those concerns. Those concerns are still very prevalent, and I think it's being covered over to some extent with all this pomp and circumstance. You're not seeing the protests in London. You're not seeing the Trump baby balloon that's flying over London and so on, because the British, quite honestly, wanted to keep that away from the cameras as much as possible during this visit.
Oh, I don't think there's any question that the itinerary of this trip was designed specifically to avoid as much controversy as humanly possible. Jim Acosta, thanks so much. Joining me here in London as we're watching this, Mike Doyle, a former advisor to former Prime Minister Tony Blair. Kate Bennett is here with me as well. Again, we're looking at Blenheim Palace right now. President of the United States, Donald Trump, along with Melania Trump, and the British Prime Minister Theresa May, and that is her husband, Philip May. This is the pageantry. And Mike, it's interesting. Jim Acosta was talking about all the drama we just saw in Brussels. There are really two dramas playing out before our eyes right now. There's the drama that President Trump always brings with him wherever he goes. And right now, that is the drama of America's place in the world, America's role in Europe, and its continued, or questionably continued, commitment to NATO. And then there's the drama surrounding British Prime Minister Theresa May. And I just don't think there's any question that this is really the most difficult week she has seen in that role. And this is a very crucial day and a crucial 2 days for her. And there's an intersection between these two dramas, isn't there?
For sure, and I think what you're seeing is building on what's been happening at the NATO summit for the 2 days, the combination of issues that are on the plate for these two leaders to talk about. Now, look, there's a strategic opportunity for Britain here, and one that Theresa May will hopefully take advantage of, and that is, other than his caddy in Scotland, she's going to be the last person to speak to President Trump before he goes and sees President Putin for that summit in Helsinki. And so the Britain will certainly be hoping that it can be part of sending a clear message for what he needs to do and say with the President-Trump relationship. And no question that the NATO summit this week and his rhetoric in the past about bringing Russia back into the G7, G8 family will have concerned people. But on the domestic front, these relationships between Britain and America are always difficult for prime ministers and presidents, particularly when you have that difference of ideology. And yet most people, if you look at the polling, do take a pragmatic view that they understand the need for Britain and America to have that strong relationship, even if it's purely for reasons of trade and business and so on, but that ultimately this is an alliance of people and values rather than a political agreement necessarily between the two leaders.
I think it's a very important point here for people to understand, is that the special relationship, particularly from the views here in the United Kingdom, is real and is important. And yes, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, is a hugely controversial figure here, and there will be protests here, but by and large, Brits want to see this meeting. They want to have it successful, and they appreciate this moment to a point, but there are limits. Explain that.
Yeah, the limits are that I think people, as I say, recognize that relationship, and the polling shows 50 to 39 in the latest YouGov poll that people want the trip to go ahead. But equally, those numbers show that the public aren't in favor of him meeting with the Queen. And I think that makes that distinction between recognizing what may in diplomatic language sound like a semantic distinction, but actually to the British public is quite an important distinction between a working visit, which is about the relationship between two countries centered around common values, trade, and people that has gone back generations, versus feeling like we are rolling out the red carpet and honouring a guy who, frankly, has got views that the vast majority of the British public disagree with.
Yes.
And what we're seeing with this event in Blenheim, however, is treading that line as far as you can. This is as close to a royal state visit as you can get without technically being one.
It is threading the needle, because this is, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, a lot of pageantry here, but it's not a royal visit. But Kate Bennett, and you've seen a bunch of these now, you know how much the president likes this kind of thing, and you would think this is enough to satisfy those needs for him. You don't think it's enough?
No, I mean, I think it's a perfect amount. I've never seen guests in black tie line up like that in front of the palace and watch as well. I mean, it just seems like, as you said, foreign leaders have learned this is what Donald Trump likes, this is what he prefers. They're going to go see the Queen tomorrow and arrive at Windsor. Ronald Reagan loved outdoorsy, he loved horses, and when he was there, the Queen rode horses with him at Windsor. Tomorrow, Donald Trump loves pageantry. They'll walk by the troops tomorrow. I mean, they'll service whatever leader, whatever he likes to do, and this is certainly feels very official, even though it's a working visit. It's so fascinating, and of course, the First Lady is there as well, standing by with Philip May, the two spouses. It's just been a very interesting. He didn't get any of this in Brussels. Trust me, we were in Brussels a couple days ago.
Well, the event last night, they arrived, the President and First Lady arrived together, but then they split apart into the spouses' dinners?
Exactly. So it was a leaders' working dinner. So they showed up at the museum together with all the other countries and their spouses, but Melania Trump went into a dinner with the spouses and partners, while the President went into a dinner to work with the other leaders. So certainly they took that opportunity to work. It was a cocktail party. The President walked in with the Prime Minister of Estonia and his wife last night. So certainly there were a bunch of different countries. The focus was not specifically on the President as it is here so much right now.
And obviously the focus to a great extent on the First Lady as well. And people are wondering and are going to ask, who is she wearing?
I am here to tell you, John. She is wearing it's a J. Mendel gown. She's worn J. Mendel before. It looks custom to me. She's also, you can't see it, she's wearing a matching Manolo Blahnik pump underneath. But of course, her fashion diplomacy, she uses these moments really to, reflect the host country, and of course, look appropriate. She studies these things. She packs a suitcase for each of them.
I want to be gender inclusive here, so I do want to note that Philip May, who is the spouse of the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, appears to be wearing a double-breasted tux of some kind. So that's an interesting choice there.
And I will say, too, one of the things tomorrow, the First Lady is spending some time with Mr. May. He bought a new suit for the occasion.
I know, and I love that. And I love that. I thought that was really interesting and charming of him to say, to point out, because he knows that the focus that she gets when she travels around the world, and he said he's excited for it, and he went out and bought a new suit. Do we know what kind of suit?
We don't.
I hope it's bespoke.
I'm sure it is. I will say yesterday, Brigitte Macron has learned to wear her highest heels when she stands next to Melania Trump, as she did during their event. Later on, we saw her, she changed to a smaller heel, but certainly she has learned when you stand next to 5'11" Melania Trump, you wear your tallest high heel.
Let me just ask quickly, Mike, while I have you here and as we are watching this, again, we talked about what Theresa May might want to get out of this and how precarious of a moment it is for her. Is this a no-win for her over the next 2 days?
It's certainly going to be tough for her because she obviously wants to look like they've got a strong relationship, and yet she knows that a political endorsement from Donald Trump is something that isn't exactly going to be universally popular within the British public. The thing that's interesting about this is that Donald Trump also does have an alternative political network. So he has got relationships with the likes of Nigel Farage. He has got relationships with the likes of Boris Johnson. And so therefore he will be getting an alternative narrative to the one that the Prime Minister is going to present to him in these days. And that makes it doubly hard for Theresa May, because it repeats that sort of three-way debate that she's in on all of these issues at the moment.
It'll be a nervous few days for her, especially once this music stops. Mike, Kate, thanks so much. Given everything that's going on right now, we want to go back to Washington, this House hearing with Peter Strzok.
FBI agents who did nothing other than counterintelligence investigations for the FBI. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were successful in arresting and prosecuting numerous individuals for espionage and other crimes against the United States of America. Isn't that correct?
Me as part of a large number of very competent, talented folks, yes.
And sir, you've gained a great deal of intelligence about Russian spying activities, their methods and sources in the United States and in other allied nations. Isn't that correct?
Certainly true within the United States and to a lesser extent overseas.
And you've used your skills to keep America safe.
I have, sir. It's my proud duty to have done so.
There's a lot more to your career than a few emails, isn't that correct? And text messages.
Absolutely, sir.
So to boil it down to that is really a disservice to you. I think, as opposed to the Republicans here being so desperate to find a way to discredit the Mueller investigation by discrediting you as a person, I think rather than they doing that, we should be honoring you for the work that you have done over the last 22 years to keep this nation safe. And this hearing is a reckless abuse and misuse of congressional authority. I'm looking forward to Republicans finishing the hell up with this damn Peter Strzok text message investigation. And with that, I'll yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 5 minutes.
That'd be right here. Sir Strzok, you said earlier in this hearing you were concerned about a hostile foreign power affecting our election. Do you recall the Intelligence Community Inspector General Chuck McCulloch having an investigation into an anomaly found on Hillary Clinton's emails?
I do not.
Well, let me refresh your recollection. The Intelligence Community Inspector General Chuck McCulloch sent his investigator, Frank Rucker, along with an ICIG attorney, Jeanette McMillan, to brief you and Dean Chappelle and two other FBI personnel that I won't name at this time about an anomaly they had found on Hillary Clinton's emails that were going to and from the private unauthorized server that you were supposed to be investigating. Now, do you remember it?
I remember meeting Mr. Rucker on either one or two occasions. I do not remember the specific content or discussions.
Well, I'll help you with that too then. Mr. Rucker reported to those of you, the four of you there, in the presence of the ICIG attorney, that they had found this anomaly on Hillary Clinton's emails going through a private server. And when they had done the forensic analysis, they found that her emails, every single one except for four, over 30,000 of them, were going to an address that was not on the distribution list. It was a compartmentalized bit of information that was sending it to an unauthorized source. Do you recall that?
Sir, I don't.
Well, he went on to explain it, and you didn't say anything. No. You thanked him, you shook his hand, but the problem was that it was going to an unauthorized source that was a foreign entity unrelated to Russia. And from what you've said here, you did nothing more than nod and shake the man's hand when you didn't seem to be all that concerned about our national integrity of our election when it was involving Hillary Clinton. So the forensic examination was done by the ICIG, and they can document that, but you were given that information and you did nothing with it. And one of the things I found most egregious with Mr. Horowitz's testimony, and by the way, Horowitz got a call 4 times by someone wanting to brief him, leaving messages telling him about this, and he never returned the call. He had 500 pages of bias that he gave us, and then he threw a bone to the Democrats and said, but we can't find bias. And let me tell you, when you have text messages, Mr. Strzok, the way you do, saying the things you did, you'd been better off coming in here and say, look, that was my bias. And you kind of get around to that a little bit when you say, hey, you know, everybody's got political views. Those are called biases, and we all have them. And you have come in here and said, I had no bias. And you do it with a straight face. And I watched you in the private testimony you gave. And I told some of the other guys, he is really good. He's lying. He knows, we know he's lying. And he could probably pass a polygraph. It's amazing.
Mr. Chairman.
No, this is my
Mr.
time.
Chairman, I'm sorry. Point of order.
Paused.
This point of order.
No.
The gentleman will state his point of order.
A member of this committee just asserted that this witness, who is under oath and a former agent of the FBI, lied. There is no evidence that. I ask him to withdraw it.
I do not withdraw it. He is not a member of Congress. It's not a violation of the rule. And just as you have been expressing bias through your members about what a hero
there is not a single person on this committee who has ever characterized a witness
gentleman from Rhode Island. Gentlemen,
my time.
That's a disgrace.
Gentleman from Rhode Island will suspend.
No, the disgrace,
Mr.
what this man has done.
The gentleman from Texas will suspend for a moment.
There is the disgrace. And it won't be recaptured anytime soon because of the damage you've done to the justice system. And I've talked to FBI agents around the country. You've embarrassed them. You've embarrassed yourself. And I can't help but wonder when I see you looking there with a little smirk, how many times did you look so innocent into your wife's eye and lie to her about Lisa?
Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous.
The credibility of a witness
Shame
is always
on you,
an
Mr.
issue.
Mr. Chairman, please, have you
Mr. Chairman, this is intolerable harassment of the witness.
What's wrong with that? You need your medication.
The gentleman controls the time.
I ask that the witness be permitted to respond to
He will be permitted. He will be permitted
Did
to
you
respond.
ever
The
talk
gentleman
to
controls
Hillary
the time.
Clinton during your investigation, besides the one questioning you mentioned, before that or after that to this day?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Point of order, Mr. Chairman. The gentleman will state his point of order. It is, I think, against the rules of the House for a member of the committee to be impugning the character of a witness.
It is not.
He should ask questions to elicit. The purpose of this hearing is to elicit information. He should ask questions to elicit information. He should not be impugning the character of the witness. The gentleman is advised the rules of the House only are directed to members of the House and the President of the United States. Therefore, in other words, it is okay to impugn the character of witnesses in any way whatsoever? Well, listen, I've heard many members on your side of the aisle impugn character of somebody who is covered by the rules of the House. But the gentleman, the gentleman has 20 seconds left. The clock will be turned back on, and he can complete his time, and then the witness can respond.
So if you talk to Hillary Clinton, other than the time she was examined in front of the witnesses?
No.
So after throwing away what you have with all the bias you have, you've never even gotten a thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman may respond.
Sir, well, that's quite a set of statements.
Mr. Chairman, I did not finish with a question.
The gentleman...
There was no question asked.
Mr. Chairman, he's been given the opportunity to respond. The gentleman will suspend. The time of the gentleman has expired, and as I've indicated
earlier... The rules
of
our hearings are, if there is a question asked during the time, the witness may respond to the question after the time.
The witness is going to be allowed to respond briefly.
That's a new rule.
Sir, first, I assure you, under oath, as I spoke also during my interview a week or two ago, I have always told the truth. The fact that you would accuse me otherwise, the fact that you would question whether or not that was the sort of look I would engage with in a family member who I have acknowledged hurting, goes more to a discussion about your character and what you stand for and what is going inside you.
It's to your credibility, and you lost your credibility.
While I
lost your credibility.
While I doubt it plays well to America, I'm not sure
the gentleman from Texas will suspend. The witness has had ample opportunity to express his feelings about that, and now the chair recognizes...
Mr. Chairman, there is a discussion about the representative's first assertion about what the ICIG said that I would like to respond to.
Very briefly.
Very briefly. I have no recollection of that conversation. I can tell you I am not a computer forensic expert. I can tell you that every allegation that we had, and ICIG was a great and close partner, every allegation that we had, whether from them or anybody else, was forwarded to experts who looked at it. The scores and scores of servers and BlackBerries and emails and everything we got were combed over carefully by the FBI's experts to see if there's any indicia of injury.
But you don't recall going over those emails, correct?
Gentlemen will suspend.
I have no idea what you're talking about, and frankly,
and the witness will suspend as well.
I do not know what you're talking about.
That is
enough. You just can't let a witness go on forever. When the fact is, you never did anything about those.
Order.
Correct?
Regular order.
You didn't do anything about it.
Sir, if there was a lead, I gave it to the team, unequivocally.
The gentleman,
there was nothing along the lines that
will
not
suspend.
addressed.
Well, that would come out.
Mr. Gomer, you will suspend. Mr. Deutsch, I apologize. I've been instructed by the ranking member that we're going committee to committee, so the next gentleman is going to be recognized, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes.
Wow. The American public might be forgiven for mistaking this so-called hearing for a Russian political show trial. It's got all the trappings: character assassination, demagoguery, connecting dots that aren't meant to be connected, generalizing from an isolated incident, cherry-picking facts, sometimes fabricating facts. It's astounding. It's a new low in the United States Congress. What a shame. But Mr. Strozek, you're under oath. And my understanding is the big Republican beef, in order to discredit you and discredit the FBI and thereby, hopefully, from their point of view, undermine the Mueller investigation, hinges on the fact that you sent out some indiscreet personal emails about your political views on the then pending 2016 election. Is that correct?
Sir, that's my understanding.
All right. So you're under oath. I want you to say yes or no. The following email. Character matters. Real Donald Trump is obviously not going to win, but he can still make an honorable move, step aside, and let someone else try. Did you write that email?
I don't believe I did.
No, you didn't. Republican Senator Ben Sasse wrote that email. Another unforgivable sin. He should be here as well, apparently. My wife Julia and I, we have a 15-year-old daughter. Do you think I can look her in the eye and tell her that I endorse Donald Trump? When he acts like this, and his apology, that was no apology. That was an apology for getting caught. I can't tell the good people of my state that I endorsed a person who acts like this. Was that you, Mr. Strozek?
No, sir.
No, it wasn't. It was Republican Jason Chaffetz, former chairman of my committee. Did you write the following? For the good of the country, and to give the Republicans a chance of defeating Hillary Clinton, Mr. Trump should step aside. His defeat at this point seems almost certain. And 4 years of Hillary Clinton is not what's best for this country. Mr. Trump should put the country first and do the right thing. That's you, certainly, right?
No, sir.
No, you're right. It was Republican
OPS
member of
4.
Congress Mike Coppin from Colorado. In light of these comments, Donald Trump should step aside and allow our party to replace him with Mike Pence or another appropriate nominee.
Me too.
I cannot in good conscience vote for Donald Trump, and I would never vote for Hillary Clinton. That's yours.
No, sir.
No, that's Republican Barbara Comstock of our home state of Virginia. All right, well, here's another one. It's now clear Donald Trump is not fit to be president of the United States and cannot defeat Hillary Clinton. I believe he should step aside and allow Governor Pence to lead the Republican ticket. You wrote that one.
No, sir.
You didn't? No, you're right. That's Republican Bradley Byrne of Alabama. Well, how about this one? Donald Trump's behavior makes him unacceptable as a candidate for president, and I won't vote for him. As disappointed as I've been with his antics throughout this campaign, I thought supporting the nominee was the best thing for our country and our party. Now it's abundantly clear that the best thing for our country and our party is for Trump to step aside and allow responsible, respectable Republicans to lead the ticket. You wrote that one.
No, sir.
Oh, no. That was Republican Martha Roby of Alabama. Well, how about this one? I respectfully ask that you, Mr. Trump, with all due respect, step aside, step down, allow someone else to carry the banner of principles. You wrote that one.
No, sir.
No, you're right again. That was Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah. So it sounds like when you were writing these emails in the heat of the campaign, you had a lot of good company on the Republican side of the aisle. And now you're an orphan. I wonder what changed. But your opinion was hardly a striking one, hardly unusual, especially where you and I live, Northern Virginia. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So your sin of writing an email criticizing the candidate Trump and predicting he would lose was not an isolated kind of opinion. Is that correct?
No, it was not, to my knowledge.
And do you, under oath, confirm what the Inspector General, Mr. Horowitz, said? There's no evidence, your personal opinion notwithstanding, that in any way it tainted the ongoing criminal investigation led by Mr. Mueller.
I do.
That's your testimony, under oath.
Yes.
I thank you. And I'm so sorry for the treatment you've received here today. As a member of Congress, as a member of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, I take no pleasure in watching this spectacle. Thank you, Mr. Strozak, for being here.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and I take no pleasure in the self-pity that you have shown the rest of us the entire day. I'm a former prosecutor. I loved being a prosecutor in the district attorney's office, and I spent 22 years on the criminal bench trying criminal cases, saw about 25,000 felony cases. And I saw a lot of people in law enforcement. But in our entire justice system, from the beginning to the end of the justice system, people are involved in our justice system. And those people, whoever they are, cannot be biased one way or the other. And it starts in a courtroom with the jury. Both lawyers spend a lot of time, including the court, talking to jurors about whether they're biased. Why? Because people who are biased or come across as biased, they're out of here. You can't serve on that jury. You cannot be fair. We don't let judges serve on cases if they have a bias. They are recused. Many times they just recuse themselves. They recognize there's a bias. And we don't let people testify unless the bias when they testify is allowed to be brought out. In other words, if a witness is testifying, let's say you, for example, both sides are entitled to bring out the bias for or against the about the witness that is against the offender, let's use in that case. Because in our justice system, things must be fair and things must look fair. There must not be bias, and there must not be a look of bias by anyone. That's the way our system works. Now, in my opinion, my opinion is not any better than anybody else's, but I have seen a lot of people over the years, kind of in the people business, judging people. And I have heard your statements today, and it seems to me that your own words have shown your bias. You say you're not biased, but We base things on evidence, not based necessarily on words. And your words to me prove your bias. Your attitude proves your bias. Your arrogance proves your bias. And I think your protesting too much proves your bias. But be that as it may, the scary part of that is not whether you're biased or not. The scary part of it is, well, what about other people in the FBI? What about people we don't know about that have the same attitude that you do about people who are being investigated by the FBI? That is what is scary, because people out here, the rest of us who don't get to work for the FBI or the Justice Department, we are concerned about our justice system doing the right thing for the right reason and making sure that our justice system is just. And part of the fairness in justice is that there isn't a bias for or against anybody as they go through the system. Now, based on what you said, I don't think I would ever allow you as a juror to be on a criminal case. Ever. I don't know that the defense attorney or the prosecutor would allow you to be on a jury. Because your words are what we hear. Your protesting just seems to make those words more of a show of your bias. The comment that you're going to stop him in an email or a text or something, that not only shows your bias, that shows that you're going to act on your bias and you're going to stop President Trump. That's the way it comes across. The evidence comes across. So, how do you assure us that the attitude that you have shown us today of the text messages and all of these things that we've been talking about, how do we know that's not rampant throughout the FBI? How do we know that?
Sir, what I would answer to you...
Can you just answer that question?
Yes.
How do we know that there's not bias in the FBI in this particular investigation or other investigations? How do we know that?
Sir, the way you do that is exactly what you suggested. You look to the evidence. You look to the actions of the men and women of the FBI in the conduct of their cases. You look to my actions in the conduct of the investigations. You have done, with others, a spectacular job of equating the word bias with personal political belief. And it's astounding how effective that's been. But you know full well they are not the same. The fact of bias...
Reclaiming my time. You'll have a chance to try to answer the other question that you're trying to answer. How do we know that the attitude that you have shown us today, whatever you want to call it, you know, that Mr. Cohen wants to make a saint out of you. How do we know that the attitude you have today is not the same attitude of the FBI as they're investigating other cases? How do we know that?
I'd ask that the witness...
Time of the gentleman has expired, and the gentleman may answer the question.
Hopefully without interruption.
Sir, the way you judge that is what I said. You look at the evidence. You look at the acts. What FBI agents and analysts and everybody else do. You look at what I did. You look at what the Inspector General concluded. Not only me, but all the agents and assistant directors and EADs and DDs and everybody involved in the investigation, and you see that the evidence, unequivocally, is there is no act of bias. So this false assertion that you're making that political personal belief must equal bias, that somehow we've merged those two words together in the dictionary, is one of the triumphs of what's been going on recently that I cannot disagree with more. A judge asks jurors, are you able to set aside your personal opinions and render a judgment based on the facts? Sir, you know that based on your extensive experience. What I am telling you is that I and the other men and women of the FBI every day take our personal beliefs and set those aside in vigorous pursuit of the truth wherever it lies, whatever it is.
And I don't believe you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Let's be clear about what's going on here. We understand that President Trump doesn't like this investigation. We understand that. That's clear. But what we've seen in this joint committee and in the Judiciary Committee meeting just a couple weeks back, with members of the House demeaning themselves by asserting that the Deputy Attorney General sat there under oath and lied. Today, repeated assertions that Mr. Strzok is sitting before us under oath, lying to us. The efforts to impugn the credibility not just of Mr. Strzok, but of the entire FBI. It's shameful. Truly shameful. The depths to which some of my colleagues have plummeted in order to advance a narrative to support the president's opposition to an investigation, which is an investigation, as Mr. Strzok pointed out, and as too many of us seem to have forgotten, is an investigation into the Russians' efforts to destabilize the democracy of the United States of America. I wish that the attacks that have been leveled against Mr. Strzok, the attacks on Rod Rosenstein, the attacks on our FBI director, I wish there was even a slight degree of that same fervor directed against what the Russians did in 2016 so that we could get to the bottom of that and anticipate what they're trying to do this November and in 2020. Now, Mr. Strzok, this is the Inspector General's report. The number one finding in this Inspector General's report is that the FBI should not discuss ongoing criminal investigations. That's what the IG said Director Comey did wrong. The IG said he shouldn't have done it. The IG went into great detail about the long-standing practice and the reasons for that practice to protect the integrity of ongoing criminal investigations. In this case, the investigation that I just referred to, a direct attack by a foreign adversary. But listening to my Republican colleagues, it's almost as if they never read this report. Like you never bothered to pick it up. Or worse, you read it, you understand it, but you don't care. You're asking Mr. Strzok to do exactly what the Inspector General said not to do. Exactly. Mr. Strzok, if you answer these questions that you've been asked about this investigation, are you concerned that the Inspector General could investigate you and issue a report just like this one that says that you should never have done that?
Certainly that's possible. I'd be more worried about the impact on the ongoing investigation.
I understand. It's a ridiculous position to put you in. The Inspector General explained in this nearly 600-page report that the mistake Director Comey made was discussing the ongoing steps the FBI was taking in the Hillary Clinton investigation. Here's what we've heard today. We heard it from the chairman. We heard it from my colleagues. You've got two choices. You can ignore the FBI's policy that has been put in place to protect these investigations. I'm going to let you talk about that in a second. And answer the questions, in which case maybe you trigger an IG report. Or you don't answer those questions and maybe we hold you in contempt. Now, can you just, again, since this has been a really long day, can you explain why it's important not to interfere with ongoing criminal matters?
There are a variety, and I'm sure I won't come up with all the reasons, but the first is we do a lot of investigations where we never charge anybody, and it's simply not fair to, given the investigative power we have, to do something that would unnecessarily tarnish them or their image. Two, in the cases where we are investigating, talking about it is going to screw up a bunch of things you might want to do investigatively, talking to witnesses, talking to the subject. And then finally, you want somebody to have a fair trial. And if we're talking about it or putting our finger on the scale, it would just be horribly inappropriate and against what we stand for in the criminal justice system.
And the negative consequences on the outcome of that investigation?
Would be tremendous. Would adversely impact potentially the ability to get a fair trial, to conduct a competent investigation, to conduct one that arrived at the truth.
Right. Mr. Strzok, I appreciate that last comment, and I would just urge my colleagues that in the midst of this apoplexy that seems to be breaking out among so many of my colleagues, that we remember that ultimately what we're really trying to do here is get to the truth. And the truth that we need to get to is exactly what a hostile foreign adversary did to interfere with our democracy. Let's please keep that in mind as we move forward. Let's make that the focus. That's what the American people are expecting. That's what they're counting on us to do. get out of the way. Let this investigation go forward. Let's get to the truth. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Marine, is recognized. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Strzok, I have here, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, the Ethics Handbook of Department of Justice, of which the FBI falls under.
Yes.
And there are several paragraphs that I want to read to you. First one is General Principles of Ethical Conduct, continued. Employees shall endeavor to avoid any actions creating the appearance that they are violating the law or the ethical standards set forth. Whether particular circumstances create an appearance that the law or these standards have been violated shall be determined from the perspective of a reasonable person with the knowledge of the relevant facts. Next one is appearance of impropriety. An employee shall endeavor to avoid any actions creating the appearance that the employee is violating the law or the ethical standards set forth in these guidelines. Furthermore, it states, for employees for whom a security clearance is required, and you do have a security clearance, correct?
Today I do, yes.
You've had one for quite a while, yes. Other than the circumstances?
Yes.
For performance of their official duties, prohibited conduct, and more may be grounds for suspension or revocation of a clearance. This could also result in adverse disciplinary action, including suspension or removal. Under the Hatch Act, all federal employees may vote, express opinions, and make political contributions under the Hatch Act. Active participation in partisan political activities by federal employees is restricted. And employees, and I want you to listen to this very carefully, serving in certain positions are more restricted than others. I think you are a person that falls into that category as well. I am just actually disheartened about the situation that you are in. And I say this with no prejudice, and I think you are your own worst enemy. You have an answer for everything. You have an attitude that is very obvious today, and you are the kind of witness that you and I, as a prosecutor for 18 years, a district attorney and a U.S. attorney, would love to get on the stand. And the reasonableness of the statements that you made, and I'm not going to get into the language, but the repetitiveness of it. Where was your judgment? What were you not thinking when you were sending the emails and the statements that you made and the comments in that of the people in Virginia? I would expect someone of your caliber to be way above that. You got carried away. You got impressed with yourself, and you're in a position that I'm sorry that that's the case. But if you are trying to draw a distinction, a wide distinction between bias and political opinion, there's not the wide distinction that you are drawing at this point. Because I would bet the farm that if you were sitting next to me as the investigating prosecutor, and I was the prosecutor, and Judge Poe or another judge were handling the case, whether it's civil or criminal, you and I would be pointing out the biases that I see that you have exhibited here. I just don't understand your judgment based on your background, and you may respond to that.
Sir, I appreciate your comments and I appreciate your concern. The first thing I would tell you is I'm disappointed if you did not understand the amount of regret that I expressed from the beginning of my opening statement to the harm and damage that this has caused the people I love and the institution
I do understand that now, sir. But it's in hindsight. And people like you and I that are here to protect the citizens, We should be thinking of this before.
Congressman, without question, and I would absolutely agree with you that there are things that I regret in retrospect. And I hope that comes across today. I know a large portion of today has been combative in a way that has nothing to do with my sense of regret and remorse. I would draw, since you brought up the ethics manual, I would note in that manual, in further restricted employees, every FBI employee, many DOJ employees, other members of the intelligence community are restricted. But within that category, if you read that manual, citing the Hatch Act, it says, except for where otherwise prohibited, and that has to do with activities coordinating with a political party, employees may not only have political opinions, but they are encouraged to express them privately and publicly. Yeah. So, sir, well, I don't draw any disagreement with you about bias where it occurs. What I disagree with you and so many people today is that political belief does not equate to bias, and we always have to go to the evidence. If you can demonstrate evidence of acts of bias, well, then bias is there. But in the absence of any, and truly, the Inspector General, this committee, any number of other people have looked and looked and looked, and not a single act tells me it didn't occur, because really competent people have looked for it. And so, beyond me telling you under oath that I know it didn't happen, what's important to realize is it's not just me. It's this entirety of folks looking at it. It is the entirety of structure of the FBI who is built not to do those things and not to allow it in others.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Kelly, for 5 minutes.
I know it's been a long day for you, so I will keep it simple. Some questions will be repetitive, but if you could just say yes or no. In your time at the FBI, have you ever investigated a member of the Democratic Party?
Yes.
Did any of those investigations result in an indictment?
No, not to my recollection.
Have you ever investigated anyone that identifies as independent or unaffiliated with either of the two major political parties?
Ma'am, I don't know.
So you don't know if any of those resulted in...
Well, I don't know that. I know when I'm thinking of the Democratic Party, clearly Secretary Clinton was part of who we looked at, and she was very clearly part of the Democratic Party. I don't tend to, beyond that, I'm not a public corruption agent, and political affiliation is not something we looked at.
But in your assessment, would your work history suggest a bias by you toward any one political party?
No, not at all.
You investigated, as you said, Secretary Clinton for use of private emails.
Yes.
She is a member of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
We know you have investigated a Republican, provided your participation in the ongoing Mueller investigation. And we know that that investigation has led to an indictment. In fact, it has led to 19 indictments, 5 guilty pleas, and a host of charges filed against former campaign and White House advisors to President Trump, as well as Russian nationals and companies. So is it fair to say that you have investigated and indicted individuals from the political spectrum? Or you may not even be aware of them?
Yes, ma'am. We don't look at that, so I don't know, but it's a fair assumption.
There have been news reports that President Trump's advisors, Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, Stephen Miller, and former White House official Stephen Bannon, Reince Priebus, and Gary Cohn all used private email to conduct official business. President Trump is a Republican, correct?
Yes.
So these individuals were our key staffers for a Republican president, correct?
Yes.
These individuals serve or served as senior advisors to the president, White House chief strategist, White House chief of staff, and director of the National Economic Council. It is safe to say that individuals in such high-ranking positions are exposed to sensitive, perhaps top-secret materials.
Yes.
To your knowledge, has the FBI opened investigations against their use of private emails for official White House business?
I'm going to answer that. I can't answer that based on if they were ongoing. It would be inappropriate for me to talk about them.
Okay. I would like to note that neither the House Judiciary Committee nor the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee have open hearings on that issue, and several of those individuals named continue to advise the President of the United States and receive a paycheck paid by our tax dollars. Also, I'd like to say when constituents call my office, they are Dems, they are Republicans, they're independents, and they're not involved like all of us. And if you ask them, I am sure that they would say they receive top-notch service from my office, and I have my biases like everybody else, like we've talked about. And listening to the conversation today, I have to wonder about some of my Republican colleagues, not everybody, But since you apparently think that biases prevent people from doing their best job, it makes me wonder what happens when Democrats call your office. Do you not give them the same service as you give your Republican constituents? Because that's what you keep implying over and over and over and over. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Sanford, for 5 minutes.
I appreciate it, Chairman, and if I might, I'm going to yield my time to my colleague from Ohio.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Agent Strzok, I want to go back to this email you sent on January 10th regarding the BuzzFeed pending publishing of BuzzFeed publishing of the dossier. You have that in front of you again?
I do.
Okay, my last round of questioning. You said you spoke with Bruce Orr several times in the 2016-2017 time period. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. And at the time you were working with Mr. Orr, did you know that he was meeting with representatives from Fusion, including Glenn Simpson?
May I consult with counsel, sir?
You sure can. If you could hold my time, please.
Sir, again, I would like to answer your question, and it's a short and easily answerable question, but at the direction of the FBI, I cannot discuss the content of the operational matters that I discussed with Mr. Orr.
I appreciate that, Agent Strzok. At the time you were meeting with Bruce Orr, did you know that his wife, Nellie, worked for Fusion?
Again, I believe the same answer. Stand by, sir, again, please. I'm sorry about the time. Sir, again, I'm sorry. I would like to answer that question, but at the direction of the FBI, because it relates to an ongoing operational matter, I can't.
Let's go back to the email. I just want to make sure I understand this. It sounds like in your email you're saying comparing now. It sounds like there are 3 copies, but 2 different versions. The set you are examining and referencing to your colleagues, you say is identical to what McCain had, again referring to the dossier. And then you're saying the one from Corn and Simpson, you won't tell me who those individuals are, but that one is different. Is that an accurate reading of your email?
Sir, it isn't, and I think to give you the content or the context of that comment, I would have to. I have to tell you, sir, this is more frustrating for me than it is for you.
I'm not
because
sure
of
about that,
to frame that, to give you an accurate answer, I would have to give you the context of what was going on, which includes details that I've been instructed by the FBI that I may not provide.
Well, there's another email down below on the one you're looking at, which talks about BuzzFeed has 16 of the reports. Looks like they have 16 of the, I believe, 17 sections that made up the entire dossier. Is that an accurate reading there?
Sir, again, it's not an accurate reading. I would tell you what the FBI has told me I may say in answer to the dossier is that...
Well, that's not an accurate reading. That's what it says. BuzzFeed has 16 of the reports.
Well, sir, that is a literal reading, but understanding what that means would it require me to provide information that is beyond the scope of what the FBI has permitted me to tell you.
Well, we'd sure like to know. I want to refer you to, I don't know that you have this in front of you, but this is the House Intelligence Committee's report. Chapter 6, there's a footnote on page 113, and it says this. In late March 2017, Daniel Jones met with the FBI regarding PQG, the Penn Quarter Group, which he described as exposing foreign intelligence or foreign influence in Western elections. He told the FBI that PQG was being funded by 7 to 10 wealthy donors located primarily in New York and California who provided approximately $50 million He further stated that PQG had secured the services of Steele, his associate, and Fusion GPS to continue exposing potential Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Are you familiar with this meeting Mr. Jones had with the FBI?
I'm not, and I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I'm not aware.
I'm going from the intelligence report that the majority issued from the House Intelligence Committee.
I'm not aware of that meeting or who that is.
Have you ever spoke with Daniel Jones?
No.
Do you know Mr. Jones at all?
I do not.
All right. I want to go back to one more question I asked you the first round, Mr. Strzok. Mr. Simpson, when he did testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, was asked about Fusion. No one from Fusion ever spoke with the FBI. Is there any way that that contradicts what's in the email that I've been referencing with you?
I don't know. I can tell you I have not spoken to Mr. Simpson.
You've not spoken to Mr. Simpson. I asked you that. I asked you that the first time. All right. I thank the chairman, and I thank the gentleman from South Carolina for yielding. I yield back to the gentleman.
The chair would note that several of the questions asked by the gentleman were not answered by the witness on the advice of his counsel, and I presume through the FBI. And we will note those questions so that we can address them at a future time, because I find it stunning that they are not allowing you to answer those questions, Mr. Strzok. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Gutierrez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The chairman started this hearing by saying, I wish this hearing wasn't necessary. Well, sorry if I don't believe that. Of course, he wants this hearing, and it isn't necessary. Now, I think there are hearings that are necessary, and we see them every day. There are 3,000 children separated from their moms and dads, and the government doesn't know where their moms and dads are and can't even bring them together. That seems like something the Judiciary Committee should be investigating. We start a policy in this country where we ban Muslims from coming in, and we make a test, a religious test. Sounds to me like something the Judiciary Committee should take up. We have a president of the United States. There are 16 women who have come forward to say that the president of the United States has attacked them. And what does this committee do? No hearings. Even one of the members of this committee had to resign in disgrace because he asked one of his staffers for $1 million if she would carry a baby for him. Do we have any hearings on the state and the plight of women in the workplace in America? No. These are all things and issues that are on the American people's minds. But we don't want to talk about those issues. Those should be issues that I believe are pertinent and should have hearings before this committee. But what we want to have hearings is to bring Mr. Strzok here so that we can regurgitate and continue to say that he is lying and that he is biased and somehow he corrupted the investigation to the point that we can't believe Mr. Mueller, that we can't believe Mr. Rosenstein, that we can't believe the new FBI director who was appointed by the current president of the United States, and that we should abandon. My members on the other side, if there are two people that are thrilled and excited today, there are two people. The folks over at Fox News and at the Kremlin, because they both worked on one thing, electing President Trump, President of the United States of America. They've got to be overjoyed today at the Kremlin, and they've got to be applauding. And watch the newsreel tonight, because a lot of this today is simply what? Auditioning for Fox News, and of course, at the clapping at the Kremlin. I never thought I would see a time that the Congress of the United States would do the work of destroying. Because what do we know? We know very clearly that our men and women of the intelligence community have unanimously stated, and this is unrefutable, that the Russians worked to undermine our democracy and to elect Donald Trump President of the United States. And that is something that's irrefutable. You can say what you want about Mr. Strzok, that's irrefutable. And yet we do not investigate that. How can we have such an attack on our democracy and we don't investigate? But we want to investigate Mr. Strzok. So I want to ask you, Mr. Strzok, because they've kept saying you have this bias. When did you learn, and how did you learn about the investigation into the possible collusion between the Donald Trump campaign and Russian influence in our 2016 election?
Sir, I'm limited to what Director Comey was authorized to say by the Department of Justice, but in late July.
So in late July. And when did the public learn about the investigation into Russian collusion and Donald Trump's investigation?
I don't remember a specific date, but it was well into the following year.
It was after the election?
Yes, sir.
So what we're to believe from our Republican majority, that you're so biased, you're such a Democrat that you can't hold back from trying to destroy Donald Trump. Yet you never told anybody that there was an investigation into Donald Trump's campaign and collusion with the Russians? You never told anybody about that?
No, sir.
You never talked to a reporter about that?
Never.
But you had it in your hands. Well, maybe you didn't, because, in America, you could do almost anything. But you did have almost a magical bullet in your hand to Donald Trump investigation. And did you use it?
No, sir.
No, you didn't. Right? Are there Republicans that work at the FBI? Because it makes it sound like you're all Democrats. I never heard that before, but are there Republicans?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What would be interesting here is, since you like to cherry pick the Democrats that given money, the FBI agents that give money to Democrats, why don't you reveal the Republican members of the FBI that give money to Republicans? Why don't you reveal the Republican members of the FBI that are in and state very clearly when they apply for a voter registration, they apply as Republicans? They don't. Because that's not what this is about. What this is about is for the American public, Mr. Strzok. It's really not about you. They want to damage and destroy our democracy. And one of the ways they do it is by taking an institution like the FBI and destroying it. And that, I think, is really regrettable. Okay, Kremlin, another good day for you. You influenced the election. You wanted Donald Trump to win. You won that one. And now you want to destroy our institutions. Congratulations, Kremlin. And congratulations to everybody that's helping them.
Gentleman from Illinois yields back. The gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Desjardins, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Strzok, and I'd like to yield the balance of my time to Chairman Gowdy. But in light of the last round of questioning, it's fair to say that you wanted to stop President Trump from being elected, in your own words, didn't you?
No, sir. That was my expression, that I had a preference not for candidate Trump to be president, but that I did not and would not.
Did I not hear you read your own text correctly, that you would stop him? You would stop it?
No, sir, you misunderstood or misheard me. I said that my sense, and not recalling writing that text, was that the American populace wouldn't elect
you. You don't
president.
like Donald Trump, do you?
It's fair to say I'm not a fan, sir.
Yeah. And were you the only one who could have done the job you're doing, or were you the only one that could have led this investigation in the FBI?
Sir, it was logical, and given that I was number 2 in counterintelligence, that I would have a role in this investigation. But no, there are very qualified folks in the FBI. DADs, there are not that many at my level.
So, in retrospect, then, should you have recused yourself in this case?
Absolutely not, sir.
You don't like this man. You didn't want him to become president. You had several very disparaging text messages with your friend about this, but yet you didn't once think that maybe somebody else should take this case.
No, sir, and I'll tell you what, there are times where I didn't particularly care for Secretary Clinton, and I investigated that absolutely as objectively and aggressively as I did any other investigation. So no, I don't think recusal was at all merited.
Okay. Well, that's the one thing I've struggled with here today, listening to your testimony, because I do think a man in your position and power and the respect you should have, or that people should have for you because of your position in the FBI, that you would have stopped to think that maybe there was somebody that could do a better job that didn't have such disdain for this president. You claim to be such a patriot, but once he was elected, you continued to do this. And I think that you have to accept that elections have consequences. But I'll yield the balance of my time to our chairman.
The gentleman yields. Agent Strzok, now I'm confused, because I thought on that August 8, 2016 text that you did not recall typing it. And then you said that you recalled it was late at night, and that somehow mitigated the content of what you typed. So do you recall it, or was it late at night? And what else do you recall about the timing of that?
Mr. Chairman, I think my recollection and statements have been consistent across the board. I don't remember typing it. It was late at night. My sense was, I can tell you what it was not. It was not a suggestion that I or the FBI take any action.
Well, I'll tell you what, instead of us musing about what you meant, why don't we just go with what you said?
Okay. So I would actually rather go with what I did. But well, that is, at the end of the day, that is...
We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a second, I promise you. No, he's not. We'll stop it. And I think you've agreed that it was his candidacy, right?
or his election. I don't think, again, not recalling writing it. His candidacy, his election, I don't recall writing it. I'm not sure what it means.
And what do you mean by stop?
Stop it, again, my sense, looking at the context, was that there was no way, coming off the heels of insulting the Khan family, that the American and all the other statements that had been made in the comparison of genital size during a debate and everything else, that there was no way that the American population was going to elect this man. So my sense was this is a off-the-cuff, hey, don't worry about it sort of comment. And if you look at the next day when I send a text saying, hey, what was that? It's clear there is no conspiracy, there's no meeting of the minds, there's no suggestion of actions. It was merely a one-off comment.
And of course, it's about a week before you use the word "we" again in connection with an insurance policy to make sure that he was not elected president. And then we get to the day Mueller was appointed special counsel, day after. Let's go through this one again, see if it rings a bell with you. Who gives a F, one more AD, an investigation leading to impeachment with a question mark? Why are you talking about impeachment the day of special counsel's appointment?
Well, sir,
and while you're thinking about that, let me give you a few other options you could have said. An investigation leading into indictments against Russians, an investigation leading to better election security, an investigation leading into a robust response to what Russia tried to do to our country. But you didn't say any of that, Agent Strzok. You went straight to impeachment. Do you know how impeachment works?
I have a general understanding.
How does it work?
Sir, my understanding is limited to that is something done by the Congress, that there are articles of impeachment, and the procedure by which that occurs, I am not an expert.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you have to be a sitting office holder to be impeached?
Sir, I don't know the answer.